And recording in progress. Hello, everyone, and I'd like to thank all speakers and all participants for attending this summer 2024 issue of the Terasem Colloquium. I'm sorry, I'm doing a couple of things in last minute to admit people in. This Terasem Colloquium is dedicated to futurist philosophy. We have called it Old and New, Radically Optimistic Futurisms. Together with this colloquium, we have also published the summer 2024 issue of Terasem's Journal of Geoethical Nanotechnology, which has a short interview between me and David Orban. It's a question and answer of the current status of artificial intelligence and futurist philosophies, including effective accelerationism. And we also have a sneak preview of the next book by Alan Kaslev, who is the guy who started this wonderful Orion's Arm collaborative science fiction scenario. His new book is called Machines of Loving Grace, and I have been reading extracts. It's a very good book. Now, Alan had been invited to speak at this colloquium, but since he's in Australia, it would have been in the middle of the night for him, not very convenient time. So that instead of coming to speak, had a video interview with me, and I'm going to publish the video in a couple of days together with the video of this colloquium. We're going to touch on a lot of things like, technology trends and artificial intelligence, the march toward AGI, superintelligence, the possibility that future humans will be human-machine hybrids. Perhaps the next generation of artificial intelligence will be conscious beings like us. There are many questions about the future. What does that have to do with our destiny? Are we going to see machines of loving grace? And what are the spiritual implications? And especially, what can philosophy tell us about all these things? So we have invited speakers who will say things about different futurist philosophies, like, Italian futurism. And I'm really ashamed because I'm Italian, but I see that I have spelled the word Italian wrong. I'm sorry for that. We're going to talk about Russian cosmism and extropy, and also this new EX, effective acceleration, that is kind of the new kid on the futurist block, with interesting things that have been said and written. The first speaker is Riccardo Campa, the author of this really good book, Trattato di filosofia futurista, a treatise on futurist philosophies. Unfortunately, the book is only available in Italian. Another older futurist philosophy is Russian cosmist, of which this book by George Young is the standard literature reference, but there have been new books about cosmist philosophy, like the Cosmist Manifesto by Ben Goertzel, who is going to be the second speaker. And I want to mention that Ben has recently published this new book called The Consciousness Explosion. I'm just reading it, and it is a great book indeed. Robin, I don't actually know what Robin is going to talk about, but knowing him, I'm sure he will have extremely intriguing things to say. And we'll also have, and now my problem will be how to pronounce his name. I believe that could be James Pethokoukis, the author of this other very interesting book that has been recently published called The Conservative Futurist. And we're going to end with somebody who really must be in a workshop on these things. The 20th century transhumanist philosopher, Max More, whom everyone knows. And having said that, without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen, and I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, who is Riccardo Campa. Riccardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? So
yes, we can.
Talk about a few fragments of this book. And whenever I'm talking about the futurist, always when I finish speaking about their philosophy, someone says, okay, that's very interesting, very nice, very close to transhumanism, but they were fascist. Well, this is a very simplistic characterization of futurism. The only fact that this was the futurist flag. As you can see, there's a little green, a little white, and a lot of red. It already tells you that they were kind of far from fascist ideology. In fact, I keep repeating that the futurists were not fascists, they were futurists, because they had their own political party, their own manifesto. Of course, they did collaborate a little bit with the fascists for a while, for 2 years. But I will come back to this idea, to this aspect later. Now I will try to share my PowerPoint presentation, and I hope I managed, because last time it didn't work well. So tell me if I managed to share my presentation, please.
Yeah, this is great. And, you know, last time, I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, you just forgot to advance the slides while you were speaking. So I think if you just show us the same
is it
slide that you are commenting, no, try to push on the second one on the side.
No. So, yeah, in my screen, they are changing. So I understand that.
No, in my screen, they are not. Maybe if you go into presentation mode, what is this? Keynote or PowerPoint?
Let me see.
I see that on your screen, now it's changing.
Now it is changing, right?
Yes, now I see Manifesto 1909.
Wait a second, I try to.
Why don't you just go into full presentation mode using the button on the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, I'm trying to go there. Wait a second. If I click on these, can you see it changing now?
No.
No. So I go back to as I was before.
Right. Yeah, now we see Italian futurism.
Okay.
20th century.
Okay, so I'll do it like this, okay? So if you can do slide changings, that's the important thing. Second, just move this there. Okay. So, okay, so we are in the 20th century. So this movement is older than a century. The beginning of the 20th century, we had the so-called take off or second industrial revolution. And Italy, at least northern Italy, was quite advanced from the industrial point of view, not southern Italy, but we still have this divide today. And so this movement was was founded in Milan, so in the center of this was called the industrial triangle. By the way, okay. So it was founded in 1909 by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. This was the leader. He was born in Egypt, really. The interesting thing of this manifesto, the first manifesto, is that they declare to be libertarians. so anarchists basically, and they are interested in individual freedom, to extend as much as possible individual freedom, and also they are interested in revolutions and even violent revolutions, if you can see. But they also underline that they are patriotic, and they know that this is a kind of oxymoron because patriotism is usually related to conservatism. But they do explain, not just in this manifesto later, that actually if they want to improve individual freedom to the point that they wanted to abolish the police and prisons and things like that, you need a feeling joining all like society. And that could be patriotism. So patriotism was not understood as like nationalism, sense of hating other nations, but loving your own nations, so your own other citizens, to the point that you don't commit crimes and you live all together. You need this feeling in order to get individual freedom. It was a bit utopian, as you can understand. But let's move on, because what is interesting for us, as we said, is the parallel with other futurisms, and especially with modern transhumanism. Because you must know that the reason why I was involved in the transhumanist movement is that about 38 years ago, no, I guess it was like 28 years ago, was in the second half of the 90s, I was leading a group that was called the Circle of Italian Futurists, because futurism still exists in Italy. And then we were looking for other groups abroad. And then I came across an article written by Max Moore that was entitled Transhumanism Toward a Futurist Philosophy. So because I wrote down the word futurism and philosophy, and this article came out. And then I noticed that there were many similarities between transhumanism and Italian futurists of the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, there are differences because there were no computers at that time. So, but still, I will show you now what they wrote in their manifestos. And that's why after, sorry, I didn't finish my statement, I decided to change the name of our circle into the Italian Transhumanist Association. That's the way it started. Let's see, okay. So this is a manifesto, it's another manifesto. They publish around 200 manifestos. This is entitled The Multiplied Man and the Reign of the Machine. This is 1911. And they wrote, we believe in the possibility of an incalculable number of human transformations. And we declare without a smile that wings are waiting to be awakened within the flesh of man. So they're thinking about transforming humans through by using technologies. Go on. Another statement, another fragment of the manifesto is in order to prepare for the formation of the inhuman and mechanical type of multiplied man, it is necessary to drastically reduce the need for affection. Future man will reduce his heart to his purely distributed function. As you can see, you can find this stereotype that a superior kind of man has to keep control over his own feelings and sentiments and so on. This is a very old idea, actually. It goes back to ancient Greece, because all these philosophers were thinking that rationality had to dominate over feelings and sentiment. Here, probably they take it to the extreme. They want to eliminate completely feelings. And this is, of course, the basis of many dystopias in science fiction literature. We don't have to agree with everything they said, of course. I take this for granted, yes. So they also wrote something like, the multiplied man of whom we dream will preserve his genital power until death, as one does one's stomach, and we never know the tragedy of old age and impotence. Mind that in the Italian manifesto, this was censored, this part. You find it in the English version of the manifesto. Of course, you may think about Viagra or hormone therapies that we have today. So they envision this future of like the slowing down aging and preserving sexual, sexual power, let's say. They were much into women and sex, probably politically incorrect in many respects at that time. So there were some feminists that then they kind of protested against this attitude, this toxic masculinity, if you want, but then they came to a compromise. And you must know that they were for gender equality, and they were very advanced then. They found a compromise with these feminists. And but then we come back later to this when I will talk about their political agenda. The Technical Manifesto of Futurist Literature. This was published 1 year later in 1912, and Marinetti wrote something like, by means of intuition, we shall overcome the seeming irreducible divide that separates our human flesh from the metal of motors. They are envisioning a merging between humans and machines, so what we call now the cyborg. And this is a theme that keeps coming back in their manifestos. They're thinking that the human of the future will be a hybrid, human-machine hybrid. And at the point, they will also say that will be a man and female hybrid. So to be multiplied, to be augmented at maximum of possibility, they have also to overcome this gender divide. The Technical Manifesto of Futurist Literature, again, same manifesto, you read something like that. After the reign of the animal, behold the beginning of the reign of the machine. Through growing familiarity and friendship with matter, which scientists can know only in its physical and chemical reactions, we are preparing the creation of the mechanical man with interchangeable parts. So first of all, you can notice that here they mark a distinction between them and scientists. Because they were artists. Most of them, they were poets, painters, or actors, architects. They still speak in very positive way about science. My friend Giulio Prisco also wrote an article. They have a very interesting idea of science. Science have to increase the sense of the unknown according to the futures. They had a kind of modern understanding of science as not something that you accumulate over time as the positivist thought, but something that may be changed through revolutions. By the way, they had this positive attitude towards science, but they also think that the academic world is very static, is very pedantic, is very conservative. And so poets and artists may help scientists to be more daring and more creative. And okay, second point of this, as you can see, they're talking about the mechanical man with interchangeable parts. This is the idea that you can not only create a hybrid human machine, but you can change parts. Mind that Karl Marx said the superiority of the machinery over the animal is that you can change a machine piece by piece. You cannot change a horse piece by piece. A horse understood in that sense as a means of production. And here they say, okay, but we can also change animals and humans into beings that can have interchangeable parts. Here we get the Technical Manifesto of Futurist Literatures again, and we read another interesting sentence. We will liberate man from the idea of death, and hence from death itself, the supreme definition of the logical mind. The logical mind tells us that we are mortal. It goes back to this syllogism in ancient Greece that all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, so therefore Socrates is mortal. But the idea, according to the futurist, we can defeat that. We can defeat that using science and technology. And therefore, they are immortalists. We can say more about this because they are not totally materialist and atheist, but still they think that this world is important and we can achieve immortality or at least eternal youth in this world. And then we got another interesting manifesto. This was published in 1916, The New Religion of Speed, or Velocity if you want. And here we get an interesting sentence. But Marinetti said, Italians, be quick and you will be strong, optimistic, invincible, and immortal. And then why immortal? And here again, we have another, we need a philosophical reflection. In ancient Greece, they thought that the only real things are things that are unchangeable. If something is changing, that is not real. So they were looking for the so-called arche, for this substance which is invisible beyond phenomena, that is unchangeable, is uncreated and eternal. And this is the real thing, the thing that is really existing. The conclusion of the ancient Greeks was that our body is not real because it keeps changing. We get old. We are made mostly of water. So this water comes in and out continuously. Our atoms keeps changing. So they were looking for something stable. For instance, we know Epicurus said that the stable things is atoms themselves, or Thales says this is water, or Heraclitus, this is fire, or the apeiron and other substances. Here, the interesting thing is that the futurists, they kind of like turn upside down this way of thinking, because they say the real thing actually is what is changing. And they say, think about it. If we get faster and faster and faster, no, we can achieve eternity. So to achieve eternity and therefore divinity, there are two ways. Either we stop moving and changing, or we do the opposite. It is not necessary to deny the becoming of things to achieve eternity. In fact, they say the more the speed increases, the more the amount of our life increases. So given the Galilean equation that speed equals distance over time or divided by time, the extreme limit, so infinite speed, allows eternal life in just one instant. Think about it. If we travel not at the speed of life, but imagine that we can travel at infinite speed, then in one instant, we have eternity. So, conclusion, to become more divine, less human and more divine, we have to move faster. And we can move faster by building faster machines, like airplanes or trains or cars. That's the moment when they invent all of these machines. So inside the machine, there is divinity. Now, he wrote another book, quite interesting. Marinetti, was entitled Come sedurre le donne, How to Seduce Women. As you can see, you can still see this toxic masculinity here. But basically, you must know also that he wanted to abolish family and said to reduce the sexual intercourse to a mechanical contact and things like that. But in fact, he got married. He had a kind of traditional families. He really loved his wife. So he was not consistent in this. By the way, for us, the ideas now are the most important thing. And here we can read this statement. Surgery has already begun the great transformation of man, the great transition of man. After Carrel, he means Alexis Carrel, the Nobel Prize for Medicine, the French guy, that he was also a utopian. He wrote a book and he wanted to achieve like eternal youth and to create a new kind of man, a superior kind of man. By the way, after Carrel, Marinetti writes, the surgical war carries out the physiological revolution in the flesh, fusion of steel and flesh, humanization of steel and metallization of flesh in multiplied man. The multiplied man is the augmented human. Yes. Body engined with various interchangeable and replaceable parts, immortality of man. Now, sometimes they write this way without syntax. It's inside the way of doing literature. By the way, yeah, if you read the book, it's quite interesting because it's trying to convince women that all these men coming back from the First World War, from the front, here is 1917, and they come home mutilated. These men lost their limbs, they lost their arms, and these are replaced with prosthetics, artificial prosthetics. They said that they are more fascinated. These men are more attractive. They are more beautiful because these are cyborgs. So women, you should reproduce with them, not with men with their own limbs and things like that. So that's quite interesting. Let's move on. Fedele Azzari is quite an interesting character here. He wrote a book entitled Vita Simultanea Futurista in 1927, is simultaneous futurist life, or futurist simultaneous life. And he was a pilot, as you can see in this picture. He was a pilot and also a businessman. and an intellectual, of course, he was also writing. And in this book, we find this sentence: the current duration of our existence is frighteningly short compared to the intellectual possibilities that develop in proportion to lived experience, and they are immediately cut short by old age and death. He finds very frustrating this fact that life is getting very rich thanks to new technologies, to the possibilities of like traveling from a continent to another continent, or communicating by radio and things like that. And still we're getting old and dying very quickly. So this is frustrating. So one response to this problem is increasing the relative speed. And we go back to this idea that we found in this manifesto of the religion of speed. The relative speed achieved by modern communications and transportation has already doubled or tripled our living ration. So we live more because we used all these technologies. And then, the trains equipped with telephone, cinematograph, and radio, the complicated mechanical armchairs with simultaneous hairdressing, manicure, pedicure, message, radio audition, and telephone service, constitute characteristically modern example of simultaneous life. Basically, we are using better our time because we have all this technology. There are many people complaining about these things, these smartphones, but think about it. When we were like children and we were traveling on a bus or on a train, sometimes it was very boring. Yes? Now we can watch a movie, we can communicate, we can keep working. And this is something that really fascinated Azar, even if, of course, they were far from this, but still they already had many of these technological devices to use better our time. But of course, this is just a transitory phase, because it also hopes that we can create a new kind of man, a post-human. We call it today a transhuman, that we're calling the multiplied man or the augmented man. When mechanical surgery and biological chemistry will have produced a standardized type of resistant, indestructible, and almost eternal man-machine, the problems of speed will be less annoying than today. Of course, if we can live 1,000 years instead of 100, then we have more time to do things and progress. He also founded this society. It's the Society for the Protection of the Machine in 1927. I will just read one fragment of this. Of course, he said we should start treating machines as sentient beings, because they are living machines. He was not the only one. Think about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest that actually coined the word transhuman, and that influenced Julian Huxley, that turned the word into transhumanism. But also, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he said we shouldn't think about machines as tools. They are not tools. They are at least potentially living beings. And this was the idea also of Azari. Fedele Azari, then he wrote, I just picked one sentence from this manifesto. He said, redemption from the manual labor. This is one of the goals. The machine has enriched our life. The machine has multiplied our existence. The machine has destroyed distances. The machine has increased our standards of living. The machine will redeem us from the slavery of manual labor and will definitely eliminate poverty and therefore class struggle. He said the machine may also solve political problems if machine will work for us. By the way, as you can see, he's also using a religious jargon. He's talking about redemption. So the machine is like the new God that will give us redemption. Okay, I'm approaching the end of my presentation. Where the futurist fascist, I told you at the very beginning, each time we talk about this, yes, of course, it seems they like kind of getting close to these ideas that would later be developed by the transhumanists and so on, but they were fascist. They were not fascist for several reasons. First of all, they founded their political party in 1918. They created the cultural movement in 1909 and the party in 1918. And this party had a radical program which included promoting gender parity and abolishing marriage, inheritance, military service, and secret police. Do you see anything fascist in this program? I think it's the opposite of fascism. The fasci di combattimento, so the so-called fascist combat squads, were founded by Mussolini 1 year later in 1919. And mind that Mussolini was a socialist, as you know, and the fascist combat squads, they also had a leftist ideology at the beginning in 1919, very close to this one. So the futurists and the early fascists, they actually started collaborating, and the futurists joined this fasci di combattimento, so-called, at the beginning. This collaboration lasted 2 years. And they call it Biennio Rosso, the red 2 years, because they were very leftist and revolutionary in their programs, both the fascists and the futurists. What happened is that after 2 years, Mussolini changed his mind and started flirting with the conservatives. So the futurists wanted to get rid of the king, and the fascists, in the beginning, they agreed, and then they said, no, we change our mind, the monarchy is fine. The futurists wanted to get rid of the Vatican. They wanted to move it out from Italy to France, for instance. They wanted to get rid of Catholicism and religion. And the fascists agreed at the beginning, because even Mussolini was an atheist. But then the fascists changed their mind and said, no, the church is fine. And then also capitalism. Here, they are kind of very critical to capitalism. I mean, not completely, yes. I will tell you more about this. They are in favor of free market, but in a very specific way, the futurists. They want everybody starting from the same position, and to have many social policy to help the working class. So this was in the program of the fascists at the beginning and the futurists. After 2 years, then the fascists say, no, we're gonna defend corporate capital. And in fact, they did it in a violent way. They started beating the workers. They were striking. But if you read the manifesto of the futurists, they are for the freedom of strikes and against the use of the army and police against the workers. So it was obvious that after 2 years of collaboration with the fascists, because the fascists changed completely their agenda, and they started to be conservative, pro-monarchy, pro-church, pro-capitalism, that the futurists they divorced from them. The election was a total failure when they were together, because their ideas were, say, too advanced from the time. Then the fascists, we know, becoming more conservative, after 2 years in 1924, they won the elections, and with 64% of the consent. So a big result. But because they incorporated the pro-capitalists, so the so-called right-wing liberals, and they incorporated what we call now the Christian Democrats, or this part of them, they were called the Popular Party. So they incorporated Catholics and pro-capitalists, and they got 64%. But the futurists were out from this. And then 1 year later, in 1925, the fascists turned the democracy into a regime with a police repression and all the rest. And the futurists, of course, were far from these ideas. Now, let's see more about the agenda, the futurist agenda, political agenda. First of all, Marinetti wrote a manifesto. It was called the Manifesto of the Futurist Political Party. And then he published a book, which is entitled Futurist Democracy, Political Dynamism. So that was the title of the book. And now we find here, abolition of marriage with children raised by the state, with funds raised by a tax on free love. They said, we need free love, and all the children are in common. Why they wanted this? Because I told you before, they are in favor of free market and freedom, individual freedom. So if someone wants to start like a company, it should be free to do that. If you want to get rich, it can get rich. But it's not acceptable that some children start from a capital Like, I don't know, Elon Musk, he started with a mine of diamonds, right? And another starts in the periphery of a little city. So all the children must start from the same position with no capital. So it's illegal to give money to the children. But of course, we know that it would never work. So the only way to go out from this is taking all the children out of their families and raising them inside schools or barracks, let's say. Someone may say, well, this is not really anarchic or libertarian. Yeah, but think that they were saying, well, it is more libertarian than leaving them inside a patriarchal family with a little dictator, which is a male, an old male ruling over them. Anyway, a family is an institution. So we abolish the family, we abolish marriage, we get free love, and all the children are raised together. Of course, it's utopian, never happened yet. Bureaucratic decentralization, abolition of seniority in state careers. They didn't want bureaucracy. Then they wanted a technical government without Senate. So it was a kind of demo technocracy in the sense that it was a technocracy with 20 experts ruling the country. So an economist, an engineer, whatever. And then there was a Senate was replaced by 20 young men taken from the elected, but all of them had to be elected. Also the experts were elected. Then there was like universal suffrage direct. And so we got these 20 experts that were, let's say, pushed by the young people like to act more in a revolutionary way. So democracy is still there. People vote. Then we got like land reform similar to that of Henry George. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of this American journalist. He was very famous. He sold millions of copies at that time. So he was famous. He wanted that all the land were kind of in common. And then, of course, there would be freedom of enterprise, but people had to start from the same position again. But I'm not getting into this. If you want, you can look for information. So they were also influenced by this American intellectual, Henry George. And finally, gender equality in employment and participation in political life. They wanted women to do anything that men were doing and also voting. And they proposed to enlarge. At that time, only men were voting. Yes, and they said, no, we want women to vote. And we had to wait 1946 to have women voting in Italy. Creation of schools of courage and patriotism. That's an interesting thing. As I told you before, since we want maximum freedom for individuals, we need to create, they said, some feelings that keep together society. And this is like having people being brave. They have to learn to be brave. And they have to learn patriotism as love for other people living on their territory. Mind that there is no ethnic identitarian position here. It says that they're very clear who are Italians. It said that there are people living in Italy understood as a geographic place. And anybody that feels Italian is Italian, regardless the race or the religion or whatever they are. Mind that these ideas are also present in the doctrine of fascism written by Giovanni Gentile. So the fascists at the beginning were also anti-racist. They said, is Italian those that feel Italian? Anybody can be Italian. Italians, then of course, they have this rhetoric, nationalistic, that Italians are creative people, they are artists, and so on. If you're an artist, if you're creative, you are Italian. Racism comes later. In 1938, under the influence of Nazi Germany, and then Mussolini got influenced, and they published a Manifesto della Razza, so much later, and Marinetti refused to sign it because he's against this ideology. Okay, last point, prison reform, abolition of the political police. And again, you see, the fascism actually gave much power to political police and they didn't want even to exist. And final reflection, I don't know if I have time. If I have no time, I stop here. But do I have time, Giulio? A few minutes? Or?
You do have a couple of minutes, especially because Ben is not here yet.
My reflection is very quick, by the way. Not infrequently, that's what happened. You know, performances, exhibitions, rallies, theatrical performance by the futurists ends with shouts from the audience inviting the futurists to go to the mental hospital. They were too advanced for their time with all these ideas, hybrid human machines, and then, you know, all these utopian ideas in politics and so on. And these artists, they actually were engaging in first fights with the public. They were fighting with them. And very often, when this started happening, the manual workers were coming out from the factories and helping the futurists against the bourgeoisie. So the manual workers were siding with the futurists because the futurists were also siding with manual workers during strikes, because especially workers working with machines, for them, they were advanced people, especially working, for instance, on trains and things like that. And when they saw the fascists beating them, they were siding against. By the way, for their part, the futurists decide to take it as a compliment, to take these accusations as a compliment. What are you saying? Are we crazy? Hurrah! Yes. Here is finally the final word that I was waiting for. Beautiful finds. Yeah, we are crazy. That's true. They think that being crazy is a nice thing. By the way, to make some parallels, because of course, this is like also the goal of our presentation with modern futurism or contemporary futurism. It's interesting that, we got a similar understanding. All of us actually experience these things. And when we're thinking, look at that, we can have this technological progress that may allow us to live longer. For instance, 300, 500 years instead of 80, things like that. We were expecting people say, well, that's nice, that's fantastic, it's fine, no? But in fact, as Aubrey de Grey also said, there are people that react in a very unexpected way. It's like the prospect of eventually being able to combat aging as well as we can currently combat most infectious diseases, essentially to eliminate aging as a cause of death, in other words, strikes terror into most people. And it's hard to understand why. But it's interesting that because this is the oldest dream of humanity. If you go back to the oldest piece of literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, you find Gilgamesh trying to get eternal youth or immortality. And then you find...
Excuse me to interrupt, Riccardo.
Sorry?
I think, excuse me to interrupt, let's cut short because I believe your time is on.
I just wanted to say that Joseph Ratzinger is experiencing the same problems. So it seems that people don't go to church because they are not interested in eternity and in immortality. And he's also kind of like wondering why. So my final question is if our society is affected by a spiritual disease that makes our inherited physical disease, aging, acceptable. Okay, that's all. I close my presentation here. And if
Thank you very much, Riccardo. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah. One was about how you would define fascism. And the other that has been also discussed in the chat is what lessons we should draw from the history of Italian futurists. Try to answer that in 2 minutes, please.
Yes. So how do I define fascism? That was the question. Fascism.
Yes.
Okay, fascism, as you can see, has changed over time. Because at the beginning, fascism was kind of like, as I said, kind of leftist. Then they became more conservative. And this is actually what characterized fascism, in my opinion. It said that at the point they were like the bodyguards of the corporate capital. That's what they were doing. And they are known for this for a long time. But it's true that at the end, in the last phase of fascism, when they felt betrayed by the monarchy, by the church, by the capital, they socialized industry and they went back to the beginning. I'm talking about Italian fascism. But fascism generally now is related with like racism, which was not present at that time, by the way, for a long time in Italian fascism. But it emerged because many of the fascists, at the first moment fascists, they were Jews. This is known. The Jews would join the fascism at the beginning, and they were welcomed. So only later, so Nazism was based on like racism, but that after fascism also absorbed this. So I don't know. There are many elements there. If you ask a fascist, they will say, no, fascists are socialists. Fascists are not pro-capitalism. But of course, you find other fascists say, no, we are pro-capitalism. To cut it short, is a bit like what happened today. because there is kind of herd mentality in society, or bandwagon effect, call it as you want, that during fascism, you have to declare to be fascist, and then you could do whatever you wanted. Churchill said, oh, there are like, before there were 30 million fascists, now there are 30 million anti-fascists. Where are these 6 million Italians? You know, after people changed, they became democratic. You had to declare to be fascist, then you could be pro-socialism, pro-capitalism, pro-Catholicism, against Catholicism, and things like that. Today is the same. You have to declare to be democratic, otherwise it's over for you, whatever you do. And then you can be socialist, or you can be pro-capitalism, you can be atheist, you can be whatever you like. There was a multiplicity of like aspects inside fascism. Of course, the most striking one is dictatorship. The people didn't participate, they didn't vote from the rulers. This is obviously the most striking aspect of fascism.
Okay, I think if we start discussing politics, as we all know, that could go on forever.
Yes.
So I guess I just want to thank Riccardo for this very interesting history of Italian futurism. Excuse me, say it again.
What was the second question? I'll be very quick, because someone asked...
What lesson we should draw from the history of Italian futurism, and you have 30 seconds to answer.
30 seconds. Well, I think, you know, when I was younger, I was much fascinated by futurism. Now I think that the world has changed, and all their emphasis on war, in my opinion, now is no more current, in the sense that we are on the verge of the Third World War, and we should get more pacifist now than they were. But I accept, I like all their positive attitude toward technology and science and progress and all these things. But I would just leave back this as this like warmongering attitude of the futurist.
Thank you so very much, Riccardo. Of course, we could discuss these things for hours, but at this moment, I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker, who is Ben Goertzel, who I see is in a very nice part of the world with palm trees behind him. I really invite you, Ben. Where are you?
I'm close to you, actually. I'm on the island of Rhodes in Greece, which I ended up here sort of by accident. We had a Singularity Net event in Antalya in Turkey, and I was supposed to head to our company's office in St. Petersburg after that, but we ended up not doing that due to some visa-related issues, not for me, but for a member of my family. So, but anyway, as a bonus for these visa issues, I got some spare time in Europe, and I'm here in a very pleasant place, absolutely. And been, you know, what we were doing in Antalya in Turkey was interesting and was really directly related to the theme of this event and to what I want to talk about. So we were having an event for a new entity that I've been involved in forming, which is called the Artificial Superintelligence Alliance, which is actually a merger of 3 existing organizations: Singularity Net, Fetch.ai, and Ocean Protocol, which are 3 decentralized AI-oriented organizations. And we're doing something somewhat novel on the business side, and that each of these 3 organizations has a cryptocurrency, a utility token, which is used for payment for AI services on their respective decentralized AI platforms. And we're merging the 3 tokens of the 3 platforms: the AGIX token of Singularity Net, the FET token of Fetch.ai, and the Ocean token of Ocean Protocol. We're merging these into a single token, the ASI token, without merging the underlying organizations that are working on the underlying platform. So we're trying something new business-wise to get some added strength and oomph from putting together 3 smaller projects into a larger one, increasing the tokenomic market cap and all that, but without adding the bureaucracy and the sort of bogging down of process that you get often from merging together smaller companies into a larger one. So we're trying to use the flexibility that you get from smart contracts and cryptocurrency-based organizations to make a new sort of alliance that's merged less closely than when you merge multiple companies, but more closely than when you just have companies in partnership. And that what we're doing with ASI Alliance on the technical and business level is interesting and relevant to SingularityNet in itself. But even before I get to that, I just want to comment that, pulling together 500 people, mostly with a business background, in Antalya for an event about superintelligence is something that wasn't happening a few decades ago, right? I mean, so I think what we have in this event, as well as the particulars of the event, it's a real indication of the mainstreaming of what were not too long ago really wild, out there, futuristic concepts. And part of it is just hype and the inflation of language use, and part of it is a genuine mainstreaming of the ideas, right? I mean, of course, I introduced the term AGI in an edited book called Artificial General Intelligence in 2005. We haven't created a human level AGI yet, in spite of what some people might say. We have powerful AI systems, but we don't have human level AGI systems yet. But already the rhetoric is moving beyond AGI onto ASI to superintelligence. And, a couple of weeks after we announced the formation of this artificial superintelligence alliance in the crypto world, we saw Ilya Sutskever from OpenAI and formerly a bunch of other august, big tech companies. He's now started a new company, which is Safe Superintelligence Incorporated. So now suddenly doing AGI isn't enough to make you one of the cool kids on the block, right? You've got to be doing superintelligence, and you wonder what comes next, like hyper intelligence or super duper intelligence, right? I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of funny the way the labeling outpaces the actual achievement. On the other hand, a man or a superhuman's reach must exceed their grasp, right? And I think what we see happening here is the vision of AGI and even the vision of an ASI, which is far beyond human intelligence, is becoming palpable to a greater number of people. So you can viably have a business summit, not in Silicon Valley, but in Antalya or really anywhere else. I mean, you can viably have a business summit, which is discussing practical here and now applications of AI, how these applications are moving toward general intelligence, and then how this general intelligence might self-modify and move towards super intelligence. And you can have this discussion in an audience of forward-looking but not that out there or extraordinary business people from Turkey and around the region, and it all is perceived to fit, right? And so these ideas of AGI and then superhuman superintelligence and the disruptive impact these have, for most of my career and most of the career of most of the other speakers here, these were really pretty far out of the mainstream strange things, right? And even when Nick Bostrom published his book Superintelligence, which was 2012, which sort of casts a pall over that term by associating it with his dystopian sort of Hollywood movie-esque view of superintelligence. But I think now we've rescued the term superintelligence from its bostromization. But I've even at that time in 2012, not that many folks were taking these concepts seriously. So I think it's an interesting, very interesting time now. And well, let me take a brief step back and give a more straightforward introduction to who I am and what I'm going to chat about today in my remaining time, having sort of contextualized the island that I'm sitting on in a superintelligence context. So I'm Ben Goertzel. I'm primarily an AI researcher. I've worked on AI since the late 1980s, got my PhD in 89, and I've built a great variety of applied AI systems for various customers over the years, because after I left academia in the late 90s, I was largely earning a living doing AI consulting in the commercial world. However, my primary research interest in the beginning has been building real thinking machines that can think as well as people and ultimately much smarter than people. And I coined the term, or introduced the term, AGI in an edited volume of that name in 2005 to sort of distinguish machines that can make leaps of imagination and generalization beyond their initial programming and training, to distinguish this from AI systems that can only do one particular thing. And I've was certainly interested in transhumanism since long before I knew there was a term transhumanism. Like many others in my generation, I'm 57. I mean, I got interested in all this from science fiction, first from the original Star Trek with Kirk and Spock and all that, and then from copious science fiction stories and novels written in the 50s and 60s, which explored various aspects of AGI and superintelligence far more deeply than the Hollywood movies that guide way too much of popular thinking about AI, AGI, and ASI now. And it's been interesting to me. I got involved in, I guess, Extropy in maybe 2001, World Transhumanist Association. Not too long after that, we changed its name to Humanity Plus. It's been interesting to me to see the mainstreaming of these concepts and how fast it is, and how true is the cliche that they start off saying you're nuts, and then within like a few years they're saying, what, there's nothing even interesting there, we knew this shit all along, right? And I've seen that happen quite a lot with AI. Like, people don't even want to admit or believe that, like, for most of my career, for many decades, you could not give a talk on artificial general intelligence or machine consciousness or super intelligence in a serious, academic forum related to AI, just as you couldn't talk about human super longevity in a serious biology venue until the last 15 years or so. Now these things have become mainstreamed well enough that young people can't even conceive how far out of the mainstream these things were, right? And this is good. I mean, it's good these things are mainstreamed. The reason they're mainstreamed is that technology has gotten closer and closer to realizing these things. So you don't need that much imagination anymore to see that super longevity or superhuman intelligence might be possible, right? Like 30 years ago, you had to be a bit of a dreamer or have some uncommon insight to see that these things might be coming. Now you just have to look at what's unfolding around you with an open mind doesn't have blinders on, right? So what I want to talk about now in my remaining time is where we are with AI in terms of the path from AI to AGI to ASI, and where transhumanism and associated philosophy fits into all this. So that where I think we are now, in brief, we're poised right before a breakthrough to human level AGI. And of course, you can't prove that until you're there, just like, the Wright brothers didn't fly until they flew, right? And so up till that point, you could say, well, no one made powered human flight yet. And it's true. No one has made human level AGI yet. But I think there are multiple lines of evidence we can look at pointing to the notion we're going to get human level AGI within a few years. I mean, one is what I'd call Kurzweilian, just plotting the advents of supporting technologies such as compute power and networking and so on. And Ray was not right about everything in his book, The Singularity is Near, or his earlier books like Age of Spiritual Machines. I would argue with him on some fine points about how right he was about this or that. But I mean, on the whole, if you look at his futurological vision, it's pretty fucking close to correct. I mean, I can look at like the 70s, we had futuristic books like The Population Bomb or something, right? I mean, that was a bomb as a bit of futurism. So there are attempts at futuristic prognostication that are way, 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 way off the mark, right? And Ray is pretty close to on the mark. He's off by a few years here or there on specific things. But I mean, we can say things have been developing roughly as he said they would. He forecast 2029 for human level intelligence. And, it's looking plausible. And we now see CEOs of major corporations giving similar timelines, which is quite interesting, right? I mean, another piece of evidence, which is sort of an obvious and dumb one, but I mean, systems like ChatGPT and Llama 3 and Mixtral and Claude and so forth. Well, I don't think these are viable AGI architectures. I mean, they're doing a lot of the stuff that we wanted to see from a human level AGI. They're weak at fundamental creativity. They're not going to invent a new genre of music or literature. They're weak at complex multi-step reasoning. They're not going to author novel scientific papers. Nevertheless, I mean, they're doing an awful lot of things that commonsensically feel like human level intelligence to us. And I don't think it's fair to dismiss that just because they're cheating in a way by bunging together all human knowledge into giant lookup tables. I mean, they're still doing amazing stuff that in the past we would have thought would require full-on human level general intelligence. So that these are two lines of evidence. The third line of evidence means more to me, but less to others without my own particular scientific and technical bias. I mean, when I look at what's going on in my own AGI project, which is the OpenCog Hyperon project, the new version of the OpenCog proto-AGI system we started developing in 2008. We're moving fast. We don't have a human level AGI yet. We started rebuilding the guts of our system 2 years ago, but the pace at which we've been able to rebuild the guts of the system is remarkable by the past history. I mean, like we developed a whole new programming language paradigm, started 2 years ago. The language works. It should be scaled up to work on high speed and large amounts of memory in like a year, 9 months more or something. So we're progressing fairly rapidly toward building our AGI platform that combines deep neural nets, logical reasoning engines, and evolutionary learning. And while we haven't gotten the sort of GPT 3 or 4 level wow moment for the world yet, the research results we're getting are exciting to all of us involved in the project. And I know my colleague Neil Geisweiler, a French AGI developer currently living in Bulgaria, but he said when I recruited him to work on the project would have been perhaps 2009 or 10, he said, well, Ben, I believe your approach to AGI, but when I look at what it's going to take to implement all this, it's going to take 20 years. I'm like, well, this was 2010. Well, I hope it doesn't take 20 years. I hope it's more like 8 or 10, but if it takes 20 years, like I've got 20 more years, right? Let's do it. So he hasn't adjusted his timeline much, right? He still thinks we'll get there before 2030, because he's just looking at the precise programming steps that need to be taken. So yeah, for me, looking at Kurzweilian style extrapolation, looking at what current non-AGI systems can do, and looking at the progress of my own research program using multiple AI paradigms together to work toward AGI, all of these to me are pointing toward we may well get human level AGI in the next 5 years or so. And could be 3 years, it could be 8 years. I mean, I don't think it's 50 years. I don't think it's tomorrow. And as far as superintelligence goes, Ray put the singularity at 2025 after human level intelligence at human level AI at 2029. I don't buy that, because it's pretty clear to me I.J. Good's 1965 notion of the intelligence explosion has some meat to it. And once you have a human level thinking machine, it's going to be able to do AI development. It's going to be able to do hardware development. It's going to do programming language development. It's going to do software optimization. It's going to be able to make multiple copies of itself. Like, once you've got a human level AGI that's as smart as the people on this call, I don't see why it's not going to be able to create a significantly smarter AGI within a few years or something. I mean, it could be less. And then that guy can create something even smarter, and presto, intelligence explosion. So I would say it's years, not 16 years. It's some small integer number of years from AGI to ASI. And so this brings us to philosophy. It brings us to the question of, is this a good thing? In what sense is it a good thing? What can we do to make it a better thing by different senses of better? I mean, so as most of you already know, I radically disagree with my friend Nick Bostrom and our mutual friend Eliezer Yudkowsky on this. I mean, they're of the view that if you create a human level AGI and you haven't somehow architected it in a special way to guarantee that it's safe, then it's almost certainly going to kill everybody. And I just think this is batshit crazy. I mean, there's no reason to believe something like this. It's paranoid, emotional thinking, albeit carried out by very intelligent, rational human beings, right? I mean that if you want to say we're stepping into the great unknown and we cannot rationally know what's going to happen, of course, I mean that we can say. I mean, we're stepping into the unknown based purely on logical reasoning. Our confidence intervals for the future should be very, very wide, and I can't argue with that. I mean, there's a certain amount of intuition or faith, or call it what you will, and thinking about what happens after we have machines much smarter than us. But to say with confidence that bad things will happen if we don't make absolutely sure they won't, like there's no there's no rational logical argument for that, right? Which is funny, because there's a bunch of rationalists putting forth this argument, but it's not really based on reason. It's based on emotion. Now, I think my own emotional orientation is different. I would say I have an intuitive, or perhaps to some extent spiritual sense that this is all going to come out very well. And I have a strong feeling that AGI that we create will morph itself into ASI, which will be very kind and compassionate to humans and other sentient beings. And I think we will be able to put the kindness and compassion in our hearts into the AIs that we create in a way that will bring about a highly positive technological singularity. I don't have a knockdown rational argument for that either. I would have to say. I wrote a blog post on my Substack blog called "Why the Good Guys Usually Win." I try to spell out a rational argument why compassion and benevolence, on the whole, will dominate over being nasty, which is basically for the obvious and familiar reason that if you have mutual trust among a group of parties and you can cooperate with each other, there's just a lot of new avenues at your disposal to get things done that aren't there if you have a group of parties that are at odds with each other and constantly defending and protecting against each other. I mean, all this dissension and secrecy and protection against each other is inefficient. There's more computational power if you have trust and cooperation. So I tried to lay out a rigorous argument for that. That said, it's a statistical argument, right? It certainly doesn't tell you with any degree of certainty that rationally the singularity is sure to come out well. Like we don't know that. Like rationally, the confidence intervals are wide. It's fair that we each have our own instincts and intuitions, and we should acknowledge those for what they are. Now, what we can do, even though we don't have absolute certainty, what we can do, it seems to me, is work to guide and bias the evolution of AI technology in what we view as a positive direction. And of course, not all humans view the same thing as a positive direction. We can't even agree on basic things like should abortion be legal or should rich people send starving children money, right? I mean, 60% of Ethiopian children are now brain stunted due to malnutrition. The world isn't doing fuck about it, right? So, I mean, we don't agree with each other on what's good or ethical now. We don't agree with our own selves about what's good or ethical now. It's not like there's a simple, consistent body of human ethics that we can pass on to an AGI, even if we wanted to. But nevertheless, there are some reasonable things we can do, right? I mean, we can do our best to make sure that as AGIs grow up and start doing things in the world, they are working on education, healthcare, mental health, creating art in a way that doesn't plagiarize and rip off human artists, creating science for human benefit, not for weapons development. We're not doing a great job right now at orienting what AI does in a positive way. I mean, I used to say the main applications of AI on the planet are spying, killing, crooked gambling, and selling people junk they don't need. Now I can add plagiarism to the list since we have LLMs, right? So I mean, on the whole, selling, killing, spying, crooked gambling, and plagiarizing may not be what we want to fill the mind of the emerging superintelligence with. Maybe there should be a little more, health, education, and welfare thrown in. But that's another thing we can do, I think, to bias the odds in a positive direction is create AGI cognitive architectures that are actually capable of compassion. I mean, LLMs, while very cool systems for predicting the next token in a series of tokens and carrying out other functions as a corollary of that, they don't have a cognitive architecture capable of empathy or compassion. I mean, they don't model themselves and they don't model the other mind they're communicating with, and they don't try to establish what Martin Buber would have called an I-thou relationship with the other party they're communicating with. Like They're just not built to do that. You remember after GPT-3 came out, there were all these things like baby AGI. People were trying to make an AI agent wrapped around the LLM, but it didn't work. I mean, you have to wire self-modeling and other modeling. You have to wire this deeper into the architecture. You can't just sort of glom it onto the outside. And the third thing we should be paying attention to, if we want to bias development of AGI and ASI in a positive direction, is who owns and controls the AGI. I mean, this is what we're doing with the Artificial Superintelligence Alliance that I alluded to at the very beginning of this talk. By using decentralized networks, we're creating pools of processing power and AI software nodes that are not owned and controlled by any one party, but are owned and controlled democratically by all the participants in that network. So that, which is either wonderful or scary, depending on your orientation, but it's creating an AI and perhaps soon AGI infrastructure that is more like Bitcoin than like US dollar or RMB. Let's say it's running on the machines of all the different participants in the network. And the three groups that have merged to form the Artificial Superintelligence Alliance have built different pieces of the software to let you run distributed AI systems as decentralized AI systems. So the final point of things we can do to militate toward beneficial artificial general intelligence now is working on our own consciousness. And obviously, if we need to enlighten the human species in order to create a beneficial AGI, we would seem to be in a very bad position, because I do think the human species has been becoming more enlightened and more compassionate historically over time, but that is happening more slowly than the advance of AI technology is now, right? But nevertheless, I think, it's never a waste to uplift your own consciousness, make yourself more self-aware, more compassionate human being. And I think that to the extent the people involved in building AGI and rolling out AGI, to the sense that these people are kind-hearted and enlightened without getting too woo-woo about it, individuals were more likely to create a beneficial singularity. And of course, AI and other advanced technologies have a lot of potential to help people advance their consciousness as well, which goes into brain-computer interfacing and neurofeedback, a bunch of other cool stuff I don't have time to talk about now. But I do, however, want to take a moment to hawk my new book, which touches on all these themes, which is called The Consciousness Explosion. And you can download a free PDF copy at theconsciousnessexplosion.ai. You can also find it in hardcover paperback or Kindle versions at bookshop.org or at Amazon or other online retailers. And my co-author, Gabriel Axel-Montes, and I go over all the points I've alluded to here and many more there at far greater length than I've been able to now. So to wrap up, I think we are at a unique and critical juncture in the evolution of mind in our corner of the universe, let alone in the evolution of our species. I believe we're quite close to creating AGI and then ASI, and realizing so many of the visions that have been clear to many of us in the transhumanist world for quite some time. We cannot know for sure what's going to happen in that transition. Personally, I have a strong intuition it can come out quite well, but we can increase the odds of this happening by, joining forces together to push toward positive AGI, positive ASI, a positive singularity. And there's a lot of important things that can be done along these lines, which I don't have time to go into now because I've used up my time. But I have organized the AGI conference series, which is a technical research conference each year since 2006. We have the next one of those in Seattle, August 13th to 16th. So you can look up AGI 2024 conference. You can watch it or participate online, or please come to Seattle and participate face-to-face. Amazing group of keynote speakers this year. But as well as that technical research conference, I started earlier this year a new series, which is BGI, Beneficial General Intelligence. And not that AGI isn't for beneficial general intelligence, but it's focusing on how to make the algorithms work, whereas BGI is focused on how to achieve benefit for humans and other sentient beings that way. So we will do another BGI conference in 2025, and I'm hoping to pull together an active online community associated with BGI as well. So I would encourage everyone to participate there. I mean, all this is happening whether the historical transhumanist community participates or not. But I do think we have some ability to help nudge things in a better direction. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm sorry to have to cut you short. It's always a very unpleasant part of the host role. But we are pressed for time. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions to Ben. I see that there are a couple of questions for you in the chat. One was about the ARC AGI prize, but I would like to ask you to address those points in the chat.
Sure thing.
So now the system is telling me that it sounds like I might have switched to a different language. I don't think that is the case. But
you sound English to me. I don't
yeah,
know.
but anyway. Okay, so I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker now, who is Robin Hanson.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Robin.
I am going to put in the chat a link to the blog post that our organizer liked and suggested I talk about here, which was a post from a while ago. It was inspired by a recent essay by Mark Andreessen and this book by James Will Talk After Me about imagining that the main political alliance or axis in society would be oriented around futurism versus something else. They both hope for that and recommend it. And many people over the years have suggested something like this. I think James calls it upwing versus downwing. Other people have called it, I think Postural called it dynamist versus statist, optimist versus Luddite, modernist versus reactionary, high-tech versus high-touch. Over the years, a lot of futurists have wanted, even lusted after, our issue to become more central to politics so that everybody is arguing about and talking about our issue in terms of whether we're right or our opponents are right. And you could see why that would be a natural lust to have. Presumably, our status would rise if the main orientation of politics were around our issue, or our issue is at least central to it. So I'm a professor of economics, but I got my PhD in formal political theory a long time ago. So I've kept up with some of the literature. So first, I just want to remind you, or tell you if you don't know, that in fact, a basic result in political science is that in recent centuries, at least, most democracies have oriented themselves around a main political axis. What this axis is has changed, but in fact, this has been a key observation that, say, in U.S. Senate or House, you can explain a huge fraction of votes in terms who votes for what in terms of this one political axis, left versus right. And this is true in a lot of other countries as well. And what we see is that this one axis changes over time through what people call realignments, but that it's a consistent long-term fact that politics tends to be organized around a single main axis. And that's obviously a bit puzzling given the, in fact, high-dimensional space of policy. And we understand that in game theory terms, in terms of loyalty to the different parts of a political coalition. Once you've agreed on what the main axis is, then if you're focused on orthogonal issues, that looks a bit like you are distracted from and maybe betraying the main axis of fighting. And so everybody needs to be loyalty locked down to fight about the main axis. And then if you want your issue to be highlighted, then basically you have to, project it onto the main axis and get people on one side to be for it. And then by natural result, people on the other side will be against it if it's going to be part of the main political conversation. So now you should note that most ancient societies and even most small towns don't so much have this one main axis. They just have one ruling coalition that dominates things. And it's a stage of development in some sense when societies reach this point where there is a main axis of disagreement, and democracy is highly correlated with that. It happened a bit in ancient Greece and Rome that they had sometimes a main axis of disagreement and people aligned along it. But I do have this essay from a while back on pull the rope sideways, saying that often if you have a certain amount of influence that doesn't need to align with a main political parties, i.e. you can just pull, there's a virtue in just finding the main axis that people have a tug of war on and pulling the rope sideways, because people won't resist you so much. They're so focused on pulling in this tug of war, one side versus the other, that they can't be bothered to think about other dimensions that you might pull. Of course, the problem is you can't get very many other people to be eagerly fighting with you to pull the rope sideways, because they don't care enough to help, because they're all focused on the main tug of war. Now, it's actually pretty hard to say what exactly this main axis is in terms of some fundamental ideology or principles. People are very eager to project ideologies or principles onto whatever the main axis is in their society. But it turns out that that doesn't actually usually fit very well. So there's a nice book, say, about the myth of the left and right, about US politics, where basically all the very simple principles you might propose have just not worked very well to actually capture the differences between the different sides. People give lip service to various principles like being egalitarian or conservative or, whatever, but they don't very consistently follow those in terms of the actual policies that the different political parties push or adopt. So this desire for a main axis is fundamentally just a desire to have a main fight and to join one side of the fight and to give some sort of excuse or ideology of capturing that it's about some highbrow thing, but in fact, it's just about the fight. And that's the way most politics is. There's just a fight and people want to be on one side or the other of the fight. So that's the context in which to think about this dream many have had of futurism, our issues, becoming central to the fight. And I put a poll in the chat here, while in the previous talk, that you can look at, and where I asked the question, do you want your issue to be in the main fight issues, or do you want it to be one of the other issues? And at a 5-to-1 ratio, people say they'd rather it not be one of the main issues. Why? Well, I gave some quick summaries in the poll, but to elaborate, we actually know a bunch of correlates between the main fight issues and other issues. So the main issues that are sort of the basically align closely with the main axis of disagreement that people see as the central to the main fight, those issues tend to be different in some ways. They are, let's see, they're more, the main issues are more debated, they're more polarized, they're more passionate, there are more symbolic terms, even sacred terms, and I have an essay on the sacred, I'll put a link in later. And they're the issues that people mention more often in campaigns. But because people are fighting over so much, they get stuck and they don't change as often. You need to really build a path to change those, and everybody's fighting about that, so they get stuck. Whereas the issues that are less the main issue in politics, those issues are handled more technocratically, more pragmatically, It's easier to get changes to happen. Changes happen more often, exactly because they're not the center of the fight. So that should make you wonder, do you want your issue to be the center of the fight? Or would you rather it be seen as more of a sideline where it's dealt with more pragmatically and technocratically? Your status won't be as high in that case. That is, clearly, if you want your family to admire you and read about you in the New Yorker, etc., you should be talking about the things that everybody's talking about, and then everybody's talking about you would be the wonderful highbrow, high status outcome. But the 5-to-1 ratio in the poll, which doesn't seem crazy to me, is that in fact, you might be better off if your issue were not central to politics, because then it won't be dealt with so symbolically, so abstractly, so impractically, and stuff might actually happen. That's at least the question I want you to be pondering here. That your initial reaction might be, yeah, our issue is important. We want our issue to be seen as important. Our issue should be central, and that would be the recognition of its importance. Yes, we want it to be important. But consider that, say, in the history of technology, what happened when technologies came to a wider attention? Like nanotechnology, genetic engineering, nuclear, AI, more recently, when some people have gotten a technology like that to have wider public attentions, usually because some people can point out a risk or problem that might appear with that technology. And then people get active, being concerned about that problem, and then they fold it into politics of how you deal with problems. And that mostly has gone badly for these technologies. And you might say, maybe it's better for the most part if, say, the center of politics at least doesn't hear about your technology. It just happens in the background, and by the time they hear about it, it's already established and too late to change. Because that's how most successful technological changes have actually happened. They happened in the background, where by the time it was widespread, it was too late for politics to do much about it. They could regulate it or limit it or something, but it was widespread. Whereas technologies that become widely known and discussed well before they have much of a toehold in anything, those have been quite often just shut down and prevented from going very far. So now, if you did want to have your issue become central to politics, plausibly you will produce a coalition with other people who have other issues in politics, where you and they together as a coalition become one side of a main political axis. So a key question about futurists is, who's going to be in your coalition? What other issues do you think you dare tie futurism to? So it might help to review some of the main issues that have appeared in political axes, political coalitions over the centuries. Often there are just different regions who have conflict with each other. Different ethnicities certainly can highlight the main axis can be around ethnicities, sometimes classes, even generations. But you can have a difference between a national orientation and a global orientation. Some people more want a nation or unit to focus inward and to be more independent of outsiders, and others are more open or eager for alliances and connections to outsides. There is often a difference between, a central government or central city and people who want to promote that versus a periphery, say urban versus rural, states versus federal government in the US, and perhaps elites versus masses and populace, sort of an axis. And of course, in the last century or so, we have highlighted the issue of more or less government involvement, either in the economy or in personal lives. Those tends to be somewhat different axes or coalitions. And then there is this general issue of more or less change, which seems the closest to futurism in some sense. But even there, we often distinguish more or less change in the economy and technology from more or less change in morality and culture. And quite often, those who say call themselves progressives and are eager for changes in morality and culture, their morality and culture tell them they don't want changes in the economy and technology. So those two kinds of pro or against change tend to separate. And again, the key point is if you are hoping for some grand way in which futurism shows up in the main dimensions of politics, you'll have to wonder who you're going to ally with among these many other dimensions. It's unlikely that these others will just fade into insignificance and yours will be the only thing. More likely, there will be a perception of some package between your issue and some of these other issues. And most people love to talk about what they would do if they were king in politics. And a striking fact about politics is people hate to talk about what compromises they'd make. They hate that. They don't want at all to seem to be the sort of person who would compromise at all. But of course, actual democratic politics is all about compromise. So here is a challenge for you. If you aren't even willing to talk about who you would ally with, you're just not ready for this game, folks. This is central to the game. You have to find partners, make alliances, suck it up, and compromise. Otherwise, that's just not going to be your thing. Right now, what I've thought in the past about, gee, I wish my main issue would be a main dimension in politics. And by that, I meant I was into and still into sort of the mechanisms by which we aggregate information. That is the how we, whether it's prediction markets or elite committees or polls or whatever, if we could focus on the mechanisms, we might then choose better mechanisms, and that could go better than arguing over particular politics. But again, I don't have great prospects for who I would align with here, and it doesn't actually seem very likely that this is going to get people very passionate. This isn't for most people a sacred, passionate, symbolic issue, although maybe we could do that. My last point before I end and open up for discussion here, so I hope we'll have time for discussion because I'm not taking that much time talking, is to say that if we're thinking about what other related issues we could align with as futurists, in the last few months, I've unfortunately become persuaded that our civilization is more likely than not going to decline like the Roman Empire did, but as a world global civilization. Most proximate cause is falling fertility, causing a falling population starting in 30 years or so. But an underlying cause for that is what I call cultural drift. Our main human the superpower of humans, which is cultural evolution, we've basically broken that engine and basically broken its steering because we have far less variety and far weaker selection pressures because we're also rich and peaceful and healthy and unified as a world in many ways. And we also have turned up the rate of cultural drift because we are celebrating and eager for cultural changes that aren't very directed by selection pressures. So if there's a serious prospect of cultural decline that I think most futurists will find especially galling and especially horrifying, and we would really be against such a decline. And then I think maybe a wider range of population can realize that when we've looked in the past at declining civilizations, we have not talked very kindly or admiringly of the people who presided over declining civilizations. We blame them in high degree for the decline. And we now, our descendants in the next generation or two or three, face the prospect of being blamed by their posterity for the declining civilization they will preside over. And maybe that should a little kick in the pants to get them to be more eagerly trying to prevent such a decline. And so that if that's actually a realistic prospect, that seems like something that might more strongly motivate more people to be on the at least anti-decline side. All the things that excite us about the prospects of the future, honestly, most people find not that exciting and a little scary. But hey, being the proud residents of the best civilization on Earth so far, presiding over its decline, that's got to be a bit shameful. And maybe we should be, if you want to make the party of the future, I suggest let's make it the party of not decline. So anyway, I'm going to stop there and invite comments and questions because we should have more of that here.
Thank you so much, Robin. Well, I think I've been reading the chat for questions to you. I see especially a discussion on the US Libertarian Party, which is interesting in itself. And maybe you can see something about that. But, I want to address your point about decline. The next speaker has written a whole book about that. He hasn't joined yet. He's supposed to do so in the next few minutes. However, I do agree with you that we should all be of the party of no decline. And I wonder whether, okay, we don't like decline. I don't like decline. You don't like decline. I believe nobody likes decline, but unfortunately, it seems matter of fact that in some sense we are living through a cultural decline, especially, I would say, as far as the end of that, aggressive, bold, daring imagination that we had, for example, in the 90s is concerned. I don't see much of that around anymore. So my question to you would be, well, okay, it's good. We don't want that, but what the fuck should we actually do to have a chance to reverse that process of decline?
Well, first I want to disagree slightly on is anybody in favor of decline? In fact, if you look at sort of the major, policy,
I mean the people here.
Okay, right, with the people here, right. But there's a whole world of people in the discussion of fertility decline who are very adamant to say, look, if fertility is declining, that's because people don't want as many kids, and that's exactly what we should support them. And we should support whatever choices people are making for the number of kids. And, that must be a better world because it'll have less environmental impact and, blah, blah, blah. So there's definitely a lot of people who are all set up to celebrate a decline and to support a decline. But what can we do basically is to presumably highlight not only the fact that a decline looks plausible, but that some of the causes are, say, the cause that you outlined, that is, we're just a lot more safety oriented, for example, than we used to be. And a safety orientation sounds positive, but the opportunity cost is all the risks we're not taking. And you can basically try to identify the main cultural trends that are contributing to the decline, and in some sense, shame those trends through that association to say, look, this decline isn't just some abstract number going down. It's the result of a whole bunch of social cultural processes we can point to and say, well, we want to change those and be willing to name them and to own up to the downsides of the reversals we want to say. So, for example, a key trend contributing to lower fertility is that parents are expected to pay a lot more attention to their kids now than they used to. There's intensive parenting is a norm that's gone way up. And yes, if you have less intensive parenting, you could think of the children as being neglected. But, when I grew up, generations before me, okay, we were all neglected supposedly by modern standards, but we didn't feel very neglected. And maybe it could be okay if kids are a little more neglected compared to the high demanding standard of, paying so much attention to each kid that you're not willing to have very many of them.
There is this very interesting point raised by Mike in the chat. How about the option of like-minded individuals living to form new communities in a frontier instead of compromising, like seasteading and space colonization? And also Max has said something about that.
Well, actually, in my attempt to analyze the cultural drift and its problems and potential fixes, one potential fix that definitely stands out is if the world could more allow and even celebrate cultural variety, i.e. cults, let's call them cults. Cults are what we are named for, new small cultures that haven't taken a big hold yet. If we could be more indulgent and supportive of cults who then became somewhat insular and separated from the rest of culture and experimented with other directions cultures could go, that if we did enough of that, that would be a substantial fix to our cultural drift problem. And also, of course, to our fertility fall problem, in that the most likely scenario by which world population revives is, in fact, that groups like the Amish and Haredim, who are already doubling every 20 years and have for a century, just continue to do so until they are larger than the rest of the population. So they are at the moment cults, but growing to become bigger religions just by size. And yes, the more of those we could have, that's not just good for the future, it's also good for the underlying problem we have of cultural drift that is the underlying problem behind our decline.
Is there anything that you'd like to say about the previous discussion in the chat about the flows in the US Libertarian Party?
So what's the specific? I mean, I definitely have been around libertarians for a long time. I'm an economist here at George Mason University Economics Department, which is famous for being relatively libertarian. So I've been around libertarians professionally for my 25 years here, and of course around more often. So I know and like many libertarians personally. And of course, I vote typically in favor of libertarian policies, and I tend to advocate them. But I do have to notice that the libertarian option has been available for a while as a potential realignment of a political axis, and it hasn't really taken off that much. Basically, sometimes when, say, libertarianism becomes more popular, then, say, the Republicans become more libertarian. And so libertarian issues are definitely part of the mix of the main political arguments that people talk about, but they're typically part of a coalition, say, of left versus right, as opposed to a separate axis, which is the main axis. And obviously the Libertarian Party, their pitch is, no, we should be the main axis. This should be the main issue. And as much as I like that, I got to admit, it just doesn't grab, right? They're even in Europe, where they have proportional representation, explicitly libertarian parties haven't grabbed a very large percentage of the vote. And so, but I would, I wouldn't mind at all if it became more central. But again, with the caveat we just discussed, when your issue becomes more central, a bunch of things go wrong with how the political process deals with it. So you have to be willing to accept all those costs for your issue becoming central.
This looks like good words of wisdom to close your talk. Thank you very much, Robin.
Most welcome.
And now I'm going to have the problem of not mispronouncing the name of the next speaker, who is James Pethokoukis. I know I said it wrong, but maybe you tell me how I should say it, and however, you have the floor.
It's Pethokoukis, and that pronunciation was in the correct area code or zip code, so that's totally fine. Pethokoukis. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate being invited. So I'll start, I think. And I think one reason why I'm here today is because I wrote a book called The Conservative Futurist: How to Create the Sci-Fi World We Were Promised. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about that, but let me just do a couple of quick definitions of terms that I will be perhaps referring to. One is what I mean by conservative futurism. The conservative, well, let me say it this way. It sort of combines a commitment to classical liberal traditions, individual rights, economic freedom, limited government, and sort of my definition of American conservatism is what do American conservatives, at least up until 2016, wanted to conserve? Well, they wanted to conserve that liberal tradition. So that is what I mean by conservative. And the futurism part, I'm talking about an optimistic, solution-oriented, solutionist-oriented vision for rapid technological and economic progress, innovation, creativity, upward mobility within a liberal democratic capitalist framework. So that is sort of other people might define those things differently. Sort of my version of futurism. I'm not a futurist. I do not do scenario planning, but my version of futurism is creating an environment where people sort of have the freedom and resources and tools to, create the future they want for themselves. Sort of the classic, for me, conservative futurist that I talk a bit about in the book is someone that people under the age of maybe, I don't know, 50 have no idea, is Herman Kahn, the nuclear war theorist of the 1960s, perhaps characterized in Dr. Strangelove. But after that, he became a very sunny techno-optimist futurist in the 70s until the early 80s. When he died, President Reagan called him a futurist who didn't fear the future. So that is sort of that's a good definition of a conservative futurist for me, is someone who believes in techno-capitalism and doesn't fear the future. So that's the sort of the conservative futurist a bit. And the other part is the upwing versus downwing, which I think for our future is a more relevant division than left versus right. And upwing, as some of you probably already know, refers to an orientation that embraces rapid technological advancement and economic growth and thinks innovation is how you solve big problems. Of course, that innovation may create new problems, but then we'll solve those too. Downwing, there's your precautionary principle, skeptical of that kind of progress, and an obsession with risk, and sort of a knee-jerk advocacy of limits and caution and technological progress. I mean, good examples of upwing, space exploration, supporting nuclear energy, embracing broadly, whether it's AI or genetic editing, to drive economic growth and solve problems. Downwing, again, rather than viewing, as I do, climate change as a clean energy problem, you view it strictly as a climate change mitigation problem, and you're focusing on reducing emissions, living a less abundant life, telling people who are poor they'll never be rich. To me, that's a downwing version of climate change. A lot of skepticism of technology, which I'll talk about in a bit. And when I started writing the book, the classic example is nuclear energy, but now we know the classic example is really AI, where we got positive news stories about ChatGPT for about a week, and then it became, it's going to take all the jobs and then kill us, and that has been a reoccurring theme, with the film The Terminator as a touchstone sort of ever since. So that's still there, and of course the better safe than sorry precautionary principle. So that's what I mean by upwing versus downwing. And obviously, I believe you can be other things within that framework. You can be sort of a Democratic, I think, upwinger or downwinger. You can be a Republican upwinger or downwinger. So I think those other sort of identities work. So those are sort of a couple of definitional things I address in the book. A lot of books about economic growth and why it's important and how we get faster economic growth and the importance of technological progress. What's important to me is that we recognize that we're at a moment. I think we had a moment in the late 1960s where there was tremendous optimism about economic growth and what technology would bring. And also we saw something very similar in the late 1990s. And I certainly spent some of the book examining why those visions didn't happen. Probably multi-causal, and they're still being analyzed really today. People keep coming up with sort of different theories of why we saw sort of the, I guess among all rich countries, a slowdown in growth and productivity, and starting in the early 70s. Not to say that I think we're no better off than we were in the early 70s, but certainly not the kinds of visions that people had. And what sort of I sort of stumbled upon, and perhaps well known to all of you, is that like in the 60s, it just wasn't sort of, Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and science fiction people talking about the vision, a vision of the future that now seems science fictional, but it was certainly spread throughout society, whether it was in government, CEOs, think tanks, just a vision of what the world would be in 2000 and 2024 that now probably to a lot of people seems science fictional, but wasn't to them. So I do talk quite a bit about the reasons for that slowdown, as well as why the 1990s sort of upwing period also didn't last. But rather than go through those and give everybody a history lesson, I just like to spend, I guess, a few minutes before we take questions, talking about sort of why I am optimistic going forward, and then why I'm pessimistic. As I've done various podcasts about the book, this has happened more than once, where the producer of the podcast is typically like, a young person, often a woman between the ages of like 23 and 27, and I'll give my spiel about why I think the world's not going to end up in a cinder, why technological progress doesn't just help a thin slice of society. And she'll say, I thought that was really interesting, but nobody my age believes any of that. Total sort of pessimism and anxiety about the future. So what, and she's like, I think maybe you're probably right, but it's a tough message to sell. So why do I bother selling that message? Why do I think, hopefully the next half century, we'll begin to see some of those, what maybe now seem like retro-futuristic visions of the past, that we might see some of those emerge. So I had sort of my reasons for optimism. When I'll admit that when I started writing the book back in 2020, it was probably going to be a somewhat less optimistic book. I was writing as the pandemic was starting, and it seems like we couldn't get our act together here, at least in the United States, and there was, great reason for pessimism. I don't know if you recall a lot of stories about America being a failed state. But yet, I am sort of a natural optimist, and certainly the book was going to be optimistic. But then some things started happening that made it a lot easier to write an optimistic book. And I think often about what if in November 2022, it wasn't OpenAI and Microsoft as an investor that rolled out ChatGPT. What if it had been Hanson or Alibaba or some other Chinese entity? What would have been the reaction in the United States? Well, if you're sick of us talking about AI now, that's all we be talking about. We talk about what went wrong. How did the American free enterprise scientific system fail so badly? Thank goodness, I think, because I want the future to be a liberal democratic future. That wasn't the case. It was an American company. And it is certainly my hope, and I write quite a bit about it, and talking to technologists and economists, folks on Wall Street, that generative artificial intelligence specifically will turn out to be a very powerful general purpose technology, at least as economically significant as the combination of the PC and the internet, and that it will help, maybe not this month, maybe not in the next year, that over this decade and beyond, it will generate U.S. productivity growth and economic growth significantly faster than what people on Wall Street and the Federal Reserve have been talking about. So not a 2% economy. If it's just only as important, and I think it can be more, as the internet, then instead of a 2% American economy, and you can obviously apply this to other rich nations, maybe we're talking about a 2.4% economy, 2.5% economy, which cumulatively, year after year, is a significant increase in wealth driven by progress. So that, I mean, I think that's a huge reason to be optimistic. That perhaps was not a strong reason to be optimistic in 2019. It's not my expectation, at least as for the foreseeable future, that it will be a technology that creates jobs, not net loses jobs, that it will create new things for us to do. And I think if you want some of the more, again, what may seem like science fictional estimates of economic growth, I hope that it becomes a powerful research assistant for technologists, whether it's in biotechnology or material science, to create further advances and accelerate science. And hopefully, again, that will also show up in economic growth. So I hope the conservative case, and I hope the low end case, is that it's a technology that can at least create an environment that is, for those of us old enough, is very reminiscent of the late 1990s and beyond. So that, I mean, I think that's not a crazy bull case. I think, as I mentioned, the pandemic. I take a lot of positive out of the pandemics as far as I think changing how we see the future. I mean, if you want to find some silver linings, the fact that the U.S. government and private sector were able to come together and generate and distribute a vaccine in a short period of time, I think in time that will be seen as by both parties as a tremendous achievement. One that shows the power of a country being a wealthy country and a technologically adept country at the frontier to solve big problems. And at a time still, I think, in our culture when we're very skeptical of technology to be a problem solver rather than a problem creator, boy, that's a pretty great example of it solving a problem. Another sort of silver lining I take from the pandemic is people don't like shortages. They like abundance. Forget about shortages such as, forget about living in a world of less abundant energy. People don't like shortages of snacks on their shelves at a grocery store. So sort of, I think the sort of the degrowth, stagnationist, whatever you want to call it, decelerationist thesis, I think was wildly disproven during the pandemic. That people will not accept, certainly in rich countries, and I doubt anywhere else, anyone arguing that we need to live less well than what we imagine we would be living or to live absolutely worse. I think that is certainly not the lesson we would take from the pandemic. Another reason for optimism, as I drink my Diet Coke here, Diet Coke is also an amazing innovation. Perhaps not the internet, but pretty great. The fact that we've seen, I think, a re-embrace of nuclear power is a really great societal signal. Yes, it can help us create clean, abundant energy. But the fact that that if you certainly look at you certainly look at restarts and re-embracing of nuclear, Japan, Korea, across Europe, and in this country, where the Biden administration seems tremendously pro-nuclear. I recently had a conversation with someone from their nuclear office talking about advanced reactors and even fusion. Very pro-nuclear. And I think, more importantly, that's a signal. Like, gauging how sort of pro-progress and optimistic people are. I mean, you can word surveys all different ways, but if they embrace nuclear, given sort of the history of nuclear, I think you're saying something very powerful about how a society thinks about risk, how it thinks about the ability of technology to solve problems. So I think it's a great marker. I mean, I hope this actually results in actually building lots more reactors and not just, expressing a preference. But I think even that preference is a really good sign of how people are thinking about risk. I think another reason why I'm optimistic is really this sort of tech race with China. Lord knows we hope it doesn't end up in military conflict. But there's no doubt when I talk to people on Capitol Hill that has provided a real reframing of how many people in Washington view technology and American technological leadership. When they've been having these forums in Washington trying to figure out how to regulate AI. And certainly a year ago, there was a lot of talk about, a very strict regulatory regime and how to get it as soon as possible. But I think that has changed. I think there's a greater appreciation that some of the existential risk scenarios were unlikely. I think there's a greater appreciation of the economic upside of AI, but there's no doubt that if I'm correct and sort of the winds have changed a little bit in Washington, it's because they don't want to be in a Sputnik situation. They don't want to be the folks who help lose the AI race. So making the argument that it is a lot better if that leadership is continually extended by the United States rather than anybody else is a really powerful political argument that it resonates with people across the aisle. So that makes me very optimistic that that's an argument you can make. Like, hey, be careful. This tax or this regulation will really hurt us in this innovation race and this new space race and this new tech race with other countries. And finally, a reason for optimism to me is really social media. There was no social media when we decided to veer away from nuclear energy in the 1970s. It was you cannot organize very efficiently on kind of a mass level the way you can now. You can find other people. You see venture capitalists and technologists reaching out to the public in a way that bypasses the mainstream media, in a way to get their sort of pro-progress message out there. And in fact, they can not just do it with text, but now, if you're a regular person, you can create images and video that suggest a pro-progress vision. To me, is encouraging. Why it would be great if Hollywood did more pro-progress movies like The Martian and Interstellar. We don't have to wait for them. That if you think that message needs to get out there, you can do it yourself in a way that was not available before. But let me I'll end. I should have done the negative reasons first, but let me shift to the negative reasons. I certainly found it disconcerting that early reaction to OpenAI and large language models, that so quickly you had voices calling for not just regulation, but an AI pause or nationalization. To me, that shows just how deeply ingrained that cultural techno-pessimism is in our society after having our society marinate in it for a half century. The fact that was really only like a couple of weeks of unadulterated joy before going into the Terminator scenarios, to me, that's just a bad sign. And I wonder our societal resilience to something's going to go wrong with AI. One of those SpaceX rockets, something's going to go wrong. Especially if we have more nuclear reactors, even if they're super safe, small modular reactors, something will go wrong. And I still deeply wonder how our society will react to it. Will we learn from the past? Will we learn from Japan's example, where they freaked out over Fukushima, ended nuclear, then realized that was a bad idea, now they're restarting nuclear? Hopefully we will learn from that lesson. So I do worry about that sort of resilience. And finally, I worry about our politics. I worry about a politics that ignores, I think, good economic policy, that is sort of against economic openness, which I think is really important for economic growth. That seems to be, in some very weird ways, very anti-Silicon Valley. There's different variants, but that sort of populism, I think, I have great concern. But despite all that, if you mark sort of this great stagnation, as Tyler Cowen called it, or I call it the great downshift in my book, if you date it back to the early 70s, my whole life I have been living in that great stagnation. I have been seeing these dreams unfulfilled, being happy that, geez, at least we got the space shuttle. I didn't get a moon colony, I didn't get a Mars colony, but I got a space bus. I'll take it. and then we kind of lost that too. So I think, given where we're at today versus, I think, before the pandemic, that we see CRISPR drugs in the pipeline being approved. We Americans being able to carry themselves back to space and perhaps beyond. AI, even if I think that's a powerful technology. Even if it doesn't lead anytime soon to human level AI, I think we're going to spend a long time sort of drawing the productivity and use cases from that technology. And energy. I mean, it's almost been forgotten that we seem to be making not just great leaps in nuclear fusion, but certainly lots of private sector efforts. And I know there's certainly great enthusiasm within the energy department on that. I know, talking to people who won't talk publicly from AI companies, great enthusiasm beyond what I think they say publicly. So I think, despite those 5 negative reasons I just gave everybody, I think there's more reason to be optimistic now than in some time. And I'm glad I wrote my book. Hopefully, I think that the timing is good, and I hope the most optimistic case I present there turns out to be a pessimistic case. So I think that's what I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions people might have.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was a great talk and also a great summary anticipation of the book that I recommend everyone should read. Waiting for more questions to pop up, but I found it very interesting when you said that we shouldn't wait for Hollywood to produce cultural phenomena that can be really stimulating toward optimism, because we can do it ourselves. Now, of course, that I see where you're coming from. At the same time, well, you mentioned films like Martian and Interstellar, which had a huge budget behind them. And so, without disagreeing with you, because I do agree, how do you propose that we could overcome that little money problem that we would have if we tried to bypass Hollywood and produce good culture ourselves?
I think it's really important we try to do the culture ourselves. And you certainly see, even I think there's certainly more of a recognition, even it's my impression in sort of the science fiction writing community, that there's been sort of this dystopian overcorrection that started in the 1970s, and that if we can't imagine a better future, then we have no future, because you need to imagine a better future if you're going to deal with the disruptions caused by progress. Well, I have this newsletter called Faster Please, and I did an interview with Ronald D. Moore, who is maybe best known for Battlestar Galactica, but he's also the creator of For All Mankind, which shows an alt history America where the space race never stopped, and we got cell phones in 1984 and Mars colonies in 1990, and that continues to gain additional seasons. So when I asked him this exact question about, like, how do you change Hollywood, he's like, well, you just need more successful films. Like, you need TV shows that are, I think, pro-progress to do well, and if there's money to be made, they will make more media like that. And I have no doubt that if in the real world, if we get another economic boom because of AI, that will be reflected in our culture. If you have technology solving problems, if you have CRISPR solving sickle cell disease, if you have AI not just creating faster growth and higher incomes, but also helping create some sort of new material that we can use for rockets or whatever, I think that gets reflected in the broader culture and in popular culture. So it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg problem. But I think it's really important. I think really fingers crossed that AI proves to be as important as, as some economists hope it is.
And reading through the chat.
Can I say one thing real fast?
Oh, sure.
I think some of you, I do not remember, but I think some of you were at a 2000, 2001, late 90s, I think transhumanist conference at Yale University. So if you happen to attend that at Yale University, back then, good to see you again. Anyways, questions.
I see that there is a comment by Max that The Martian was a good, optimistic science fiction movie. I totally agree. You also mentioned Interstellar. Perhaps you could give us a list of other science fiction movies recent that can bring our spirit up in the right direction.
Yeah, boy, to get more of those two would be absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, to a great extent, the Star Trek series ends up being the exception that proves the rule. We need more than just that Star Trek. As much as I love Star Trek, I think sometimes you have to look hard. I would also recommend there was a great now I forget which streaming service, they updated the Lost in Space TV show. They did a new TV show a few years ago, which was really fantastic. It showed people solving problems using technology. The villain was always like a problem that happened because they were in a new environment. It wasn't necessarily evil aliens or this bad person. It was that their circumstances created a problem. It was a little bit like MacGyver, where they had to figure out using somewhat realistic technology how to solve problems. That Lost in Space series, which I think was like 3 or 4 seasons, that was great. I found the Expanse TV series also to be fundamentally pro-progress. Some people didn't think so, but I think, given the pessimism out there, that the Earth is going to get burned up and it's going to collapse, the fact that shows a world in the future where we're still here. Yeah, we had climate change, but we figured out how to adapt to it, and we still spread across the solar system. I think that's a very funny. It's very strange to call that a dystopian. In fact, I love the fact that there are problems, because it's not a utopia. It shows that there are problems and people using technology to solve problems. Hey, maybe there's going to be new problems, but then we'll solve those too. So I really like the Expanse quite a bit. Then I'll just highlight one more briefly. The TV version of the William Gibson book, The Peripheral, which is a dystopian book, but it also shows the risk of delaying technological progress, because in that book and in that TV series, there's a lot of problems, plague, war, and they finally got great technology. They got nanotechnology. They got, great AI. They just got it too late to prevent 80% of the global population from dying. So to quote the title of my newsletter, faster, please.
Faster, please. That's a good way to put it. I see that many people like me also like the Expanse, and Robin asks which cultural items. I think Robin forgot one word, perhaps. Tell us which cultural items you like isn't the same as outlining a planned process to influence culture.
Yeah, well, yes. That's that is fundamentally the problem. And there is sort of the chicken and the egg. That would make a lot of my ideas easier if you had a pro-progress culture. If you had a more pro-progress culture, we wouldn't be freaking out about AI killing us. We would still we would not have put our nuclear industry in stasis for a half century. So I think I'm going to come down on the side is that, here's an example. The city of Seattle. The city of Seattle was a kind of a rusty, kind of not happening place in the 70s. And then they got a lucky break. Two of their sons, who had moved to Albuquerque to start a company called Microsoft, moved back to Seattle. which really helped launch Seattle as a tech hub. Seattle got a lucky break. I think we need a lucky break to break through this cultural pessimism. And I think if AI turns out that lucky break, if it ends up accelerating progress, and we're just careful enough not to strangle it, I think we get another 1990s, which was full of cultural optimism, I think, which fed off what was happening in the real economy, in financial markets. Yeah, so I hate to give them, I hate to count on chance or luck, but we that might be happening again. So if we can just not really screw it up, this might be the opportunity we've been waiting for. I know it's one I've been waiting for.
I look very much forward to that. Now, the last question for you is from Max. But since Max is the next speaker, Max, why don't you take the floor directly and start with your nuclear question?
Oh, okay. Hi, James. I'm a regular reader of your blog.
Yes,
really
paid up subscriber. I love it.
Yeah, recommend it to other people. And I love the title Faster, Please. It's really good. My question was about nuclear power. You said that it's seeing something of a renaissance. However, I'm a little bit concerned about that. The political winds can change very quickly. We know the deep environmentalists really are against it, with a few exceptions. There's a few actually honorable exceptions. But how much do you think nuclear can do, whether in the new SMR form or the traditional forms, without a massive change in regulations and either abolition or great change to the NRC?
Yeah. Well, both. I think I'm sure Max has, and I have as well. We've seen more than one nuclear renaissance that ended. It's not the first time where there became some optimism, and then it really hasn't panned out. So I think a certain amount of pessimism, baseline pessimism, is certainly called for. But I sense a realization, and I sense it in government as well, that if you think climate change is an important issue, that the current path of not focusing on generating abundant clean energy is a dead end. So I think that's really important, and I think more environmentalists realize that. And I see that recognition in government. Ultimately you have to get the technology right. You have to get the costs down. That requires, again, I think more rate. I think we've only seen some initial early steps on doing that, a different regulatory regime. But I think it's a real start. And, of course, maybe, it's obviously, there's things happening with solar and geothermal, which are super important. But I am guardedly, cautiously optimistic that this renaissance will not be a false dawn, if I can be a little poetic there. I'm also going to apologize for leaving because I have to get on a plane to Europe for our family vacation. So I appreciate very much inviting me. Max, great talking to you. And thanks for subscribing, everybody.
Thank you very much. Great talk. And Max has the floor.
Thank you, Giulio. Oh, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, depending on where you are. It's good to see you all here. I want to talk a bit about, well, since Giulio set the theme as being exploring old and radically new optimistic philosophies, I'm going to focus, surprise, surprise, on transhumanism and extropianism. Now, I know some of you probably are very familiar with that, others maybe a bit less so. But I think the reason to really focus on this to me is that in some sense, we can say, to paraphrase another saying, we're all transhumanists now. That's not really true, of course, but we're sort of heading in that direction. We see transhumanist ideas discussed in Time magazine and newspapers. We see people discussing AI and life extension and artificial intelligence and all these things. Whereas back in the early days, back in the early 80s, these ideas were discussed by a tiny fraction of people. I used to go to a meeting in London to meet with a few people. 1982, I suppose I started to discuss exactly these topics, but there were like 5 of us there, and it was very hard to find other people who thought this way. So, so really, you can think of transhumanism as modern day form. Obviously, it didn't come out of nothing, but it also didn't come out of Huxley, as some people say. That was something didn't even read until much later on. But it did obviously come from proto-transhumanism and its various aspects, from Russian cosmism, the alchemists who had some fundamental goals of transforming the elements, which we can do to a certain extent now with nuclear physics, flight, and immortality, as they put it. So these ideas, in some form, their pre-scientific form, have been around for a long time. Obviously, space enthusiasm was a big part of this, especially for me, watching the Apollo 11 landing when I was 5 years old and being absolutely fascinated by space. It was a great physical example of getting beyond traditional human limits. Also quite early on with the cryonicists, who are a very important part of, I think, transhumanism, because you can go back to Robert Ettinger's book from 1964, Prospect of Immortality. I don't particularly like the immortality term. And his second book actually was very much transhumanist, and that was, I think, in the early 70s. So there were some ideas like that around. And we've seen this kind of grow into a lot of different aspects, different types of transhumanism with different political aspects, more or less positive aspects. The singularitarians, the Terasem movement, the machine intelligence research institute people, the whole cryptography movement, which is also basically started amongst the extropians, long-termism, effective accelerationism, the abundance and progress movements, like humanprogress.org, James's thing, upwingers, which FM 2030 defined well back several decades ago, and had his own particular view of what that meant. Long-termism, and now AI doomers. All of these different things really have a lot of roots or influences in the extropian thinking of the 1980s and 1990s. And thinking back then to those early days in the 80s, although I say we're all transhumanists now in kind of exaggerating way, nobody was a transhumanist back then. The only kind of attention they gave to these ideas, to genetic engineering, AI, and so on, life extension, was a negative one. It was just to say how bad this was and how awful and how we shouldn't allow it. So the conversation has changed considerably from, no, this is crazy stuff, it's stupid, to, well, yeah, this is going to happen, but we've got to stop it, or we've got to control it, or we have to point it in that particular direction. So that's a very important change in the conversation. And yeah, as you'll see, as I talk about some of the early stuff we did in X-Ray magazine and the style, it's very unapologetic. It's very in your face. It's very bold. It doesn't have a lot of ifs or buts. It's really kind of giving a very bold vision. So you'll get that impression as I show you some of that early stuff. Now, for me, these ideas, I mentioned some of the roots, but one thing I like to mention is the Timothy Leary's SMILE formula, SMI²LE, space migration, intelligence increase, life extension. So Tim was kind of an odd thinker, and some of his ideas were pretty good, some were pretty wild, but I love that little acronym. It's very nice, and it's like a proto-extropianism, basically. It's got some of those core ideas of overcoming human limits in it. But there are other influences on me. Robert Heinlein was mentioned. He was a very important science fiction writer for me, because he really showed the boldness of the human spirit, who relied on rigorous scientific thinking combined with courage to overcome limits. Because Arthur C. Clarke, not just his fiction, but his book, which if you haven't seen, I would check it out because it's historically important, his book, Profiles of the Future. There's also a newsletter, Keith will know this one, called Claustrophobia, back in the 80s, which was, again, a kind of space migration, intelligence, increased life extension focus. Again, a kind of a proto-extropy, and that was great. There were things like Adrian Berry's book, The Next 10,000 Years, which I bet almost nobody's heard of, but that's also highly recommended, very visionary. A bit like Robert Forward's stuff, but earlier. There was the Jonathan Glover. It's probably one of the more obscure ones, but he actually was one of my tutors at Oxford. I actually asked for him for the philosophy of mind course because I wouldn't have had him otherwise, and he agreed to it. And it was a very unusual experience. He's the only professor during my entire years at Oxford who agreed with me on pretty much everything. Everybody else, it was wildly disagreeing, like in the Marxism class, obviously in the religion class. But that was great. And he wrote a book in the 80s called What Sort of People Should There Be?, which is very transhumanist thinking. It was really thinking about genetic alteration, combining with machines, and the ethical and philosophical issues of that. So those were all important influences. A little later on, about the time we were studying Extropy, there was Hans Morovik's book, Mind Children. Again, if you haven't read that one, you've got to peruse it. It's really a classic. It's really brain stretching, mind expanding. And today, a lot of it will sound familiar. You'll say, oh, well, Kurzweil said that. Well, yes, but Moravec said it before, and a little bit differently. So he shouldn't be forgotten. I don't hear much about him these days. I'm not sure where he is. There were the early life extensionists, a very important influence on me. In my early teens, I was taking supplements and trying to do something about aging. And then the whole abundance movement, if you want to call it a movement, starting with people like Julian Simon. And now it's really progressed. Now there's a whole progress movement based on that. There's a fantastic site called humanprogress.org, which I'd strongly recommend to people. It's kind of like Our World in Data, but with a very, if you want, upwing or positive orientation. So Our World in Data is very good on a lot of topics to gather information showing how things are getting better. Kind of the Hans Rosling message that things may be bad, but they're getting better all the time. So humanprogress.org is a really upwing, pro-optimistic, very compatible with transhumanist site to check out. So for those of you who don't know, what were the extropians? Well, there's transhumanism and there's extropianism. The principles of extropy really define a particular flavor or brand of transhumanism, if you like. So transhumanism is the broader category, and you can have different versions of that with different specific views. Extropianism I define basically through the principles of extropy, which went through several versions, but the most popular one seems to have the nice acronym, best do it so, which stood for boundless expansion, self-transformation, dynamic optimism, intelligent technology, and spontaneous order. So I actually did a later version after that, but that's the most popular one. And the idea of that was, the extropian point of view basically is we need to overcome limits. So if you think of the concept of entropy, that says that in a closed system, you have an inevitable tendency towards decay and disorder. And so some environmentalists say, well, that's what's happening to the planet Earth, which is stupid because the Earth is not a closed system. We've got solar energy coming in and we can get more resources out there and so on. But that's the basic idea of entropy. Extropy is not intended as a technical opposite. It's not strictly negentropy. It's more of a metaphor to represent the ideas of overcoming limits. So we can decrease local entropy at the expense of entropy elsewhere. And what's going to happen trillions of years from now, that's a tricky question. I'm not going to delve into that, whether we can avoid the final problem. But that's the basic idea. We can keep improving things on this planet and beyond. And we need to do that using science, technology, reason, creativity, and courage. All of those things are needed. If we don't have courage, we're not going to develop these technologies. We're going to have this cultural pessimism, which we've seen very much of. Some of the ideas, apart from the extropian principles that have been important in the extropian version of transhumanism, are the principle of morphological freedom. And I introduced that very much because, to me, a lot of people will refer back to the eugenicists as a typical kind of counter-argument. They'll say, oh, the eugenicists control people's birth, they sterilize people. I want to make it very clear when I'm talking about humans improving, I'm talking about them improving themselves, not some central authority or group telling other people what kind of improvements they can have and who can't reproduce. That's totally against it. So the idea of morphological freedom is to give each individual the right over their own body, not just to have children or not have children, but to make modifications as they choose, obviously with informed consent. Also later on, I'll talk a bit more about this, develop the proactionary principle, which is very much on the obviously pro-progress side. It's intended as an opposite to the precautionary principle, which basically says don't do anything for the first time. So it's kind of disastrous for any kind of progress. But I'll come back to that one in a moment. Also, coming into the extropian movement were Natasha Vidamore, my darling wife, who did the primo post-human future body design and really emphasized the aesthetic side of this, which obviously is very important. We're talking about cultural change and the need to inspire people, where you can't inspire people just by being dry and analytical. You have to have stories and myths and visions and images to inspire people. So that's also an important part of this. So in the early days, thinking back to the early days in Southern California, we had a pretty interesting bunch of people around. We had Werner Vinge, who sadly recently passed away and didn't get cryopreserved. I don't know why that was. Bart Kosko at USC. There's Gregory Stock and his book Metaman, you may not have seen and also recommended. There's Roy Walford, the life extension researcher who investigated, actually created the immunologic theory of aging and investigated calorie restriction. There was the Los Angeles Gerontology Research Group with Steve Coles and other people, and they still maintain the list of the oldest supercentenarians. Gregory Fay from cryobiology, Michael Masucci doing video work, Gregory Benford, another science fiction writer, FM 2030, Timothy Leary, and of course Alcor was also at that time in the area. So Southern California at the time I moved there was a pretty great place for futurist thinking, actually more so than Northern California at that time. So when I got it was 1986, when I got a letter from University of Southern California inviting me to apply, I had a choice. Should I stay in England and be a graduate student in grinding poverty and misery, surrounded by people who are extremely gloomy all the time and protesting about everything? Or I can go to Southern California, the land of sunshine and brightness and progress, as it was back then. So it was a pretty easy choice, right? So I uprooted and moved 6,000 miles, and glad I did. That changed my life. I wonder what things would have been like if I hadn't done that. I have no idea. So yeah, also in that area, some interesting talking about culture. I had a meeting with Oliver Stone. Actually, Bart Costco arranged that, so I had a lunch with Oliver Stone. He was kind of interested in some of these ideas, but he's also interested in Buddhism, and he was trying to figure out his path on that. And he doesn't seem to have developed the transhumanism part. Also got to know Brett Leonard, who did Lawnmower Man, which is not particularly a positive view, but it does show virtual reality working. So really how extropianism got started, well, so I told you the roots, and it didn't start in 1988 with the magazine. Even back in, say, 1986, I was producing a magazine called Biostasis. It was the newsletter of the first European cryonics organization, which I co-founded. And that was very much a proto-extropy. It discussed all the same ideas. Unfortunately, all copies seem to have been lost, which is very unfortunate. So Extropy magazine started in 1988. It was a joint effort between myself and Tom Bell, or Tom O'Morrow, as he likes to go by. And the whole purpose of that really was to find other people who thought along these lines and to encourage a community and to discuss these ideas, because there were few and far between. And the magazine actually drew people in. I would have letters coming from obscure parts of the country saying, I didn't think anybody else in the world thought like I do. I'm so glad to find you. And it helped me to find other people, like one of the people on this call, Robin Hanson, was also in that area. And so we got to meet. We had lunch a number of times when he was, I was teaching at Pasadena City College and he was at Caltech. So it was really a great place for getting these ideas going and sparking off the magazine. I'm just going to read you a little paragraph here from the first issue. This was 1988, right? We printed 50 copies. That was all back then. And I want to read this because it gives you a flavor of the approach we had back then, which isn't necessarily the same approach I have today. Remember, I was 24 years old when I wrote this. You have a little bit of a different view of the world, a very optimistic view without too many concerns. So just going to read this. I talked about how change is going to accelerate. And I said, after wandering along at a slow pace for centuries, our world has started to enter a period of change that will far outpace historical standards. The changes occurring in the 20th century dwarf those of any previous 1,000 years, but they only hint at what the future holds. We are facing a turning point in history, a time when computers, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, self-modification, physical immortality, and other factors promise to radically transform virtually every aspect of our existence. Well, we are each of us responsible for preparing ourselves for that future and for helping others to understand the coming age. I also said in there that entropy is the supreme enemy of human hope. I like to make pronouncements like that back in the 80s and 90s. Very bold statements. But I think that was part of the appeal of extropian thinking. It was a radical alternative to the gloom and doom of the day. And yeah, as James mentioned, we've been through periods, sometime in the 60s to some extent. The late 90s were a period where we really felt like liftoff was happening, and then that all fell apart. But at the time we started this magazine, there wasn't really that much optimism. So the things we discussed, well, again, back then people thought most of this stuff was crazy stuff and unfounded, but not so much now. We discuss artificial intelligence, cognitive science, neuroscience, lack of supernatural approaches, intelligence, increased technologies, discussions of hypertext. I think that was Mark Miller back in the late 80s, way before that actually happened. Spontaneous orders, nanotechnology, psychochemicals, that was enthusiasm back then, extropic psychology, space colonization, a whole range of issues that are very common to us today. I discussed in that very kind of relevant to actually something I'll say later on. So in that very first issue, I had a piece called Morality or Reality, in which I discussed, from a philosopher's perspective, what morality is. And I basically was not so keen on any of the current moral systems. And that includes consequentialism, as I discussed there, which currently is very popular in this community. The EACC people, that is based on consequentialism. Long-termism is based on consequentialism. It seems to be the default moral system for a lot of people discussing these topics. And I'm very much an anti-consequentialist, not something we can probably get into in too much detail. But already in 1988, I was discussing that. In the fourth issue in July 1989, I had What is Wrong with Death? really confronting that issue very directly. I had a very controversial piece called In Praise of the Devil, which got me a few death threats. People obviously didn't bother to read it properly, especially even the introduction that I added later to make it very clear that I don't believe in the devil. And it was really the devil not as Satan, but as Lucifer, the light bringer, the rationalist, basically, the questioner, the one who says, well, why are we doing this? Why are we following these rules? That was the point. I tried to make it very clear, but people still managed to misunderstand it. Then in extra read number 6 in the summer of 1990, I think someone mentioned this one, Transhumanism Towards a New Philosophy. It's basically setting out the core ideas of transhumanism, comparing it with traditional religions and other philosophies of life, trying to put it in that perspective, really emphasizing the idea that transhumanism is a philosophy. It's not just a bunch of technologies we like, it's a way of looking at those technologies. And it has roots in humanism, the ideas of progress, of human effort, not relying on external authorities, whether it be gods or states, but relying on ourselves, our reason, our creativity. And then let's see, let's jump to number 8, in the winter 1991 to 92 issue, Robin Hanson's Idea Futures, which I think might be the first place that appeared. Robin can correct me if he likes, but I think it's one of the very early places that appeared. Okay. That idea is actually done rather well. Now we have all kinds of betting markets, from the Hollywood Exchange to bet on openings for movies, to Hewlett-Packard using ideas markets to predict cartridge sales, to many other forms now, all the political betting that's going on and so on. So that idea that Robin put forth has really taken a grip. And like I say, you read it here first in the early 1990s. We also discussed dynamic optimism in that issue. Again, a combination of optimism with rationality, to not just be blind optimists, but to think about how do we actually put our optimism into action. So it's not just let's hope for the future. I really don't like the word hope. I don't like the term existential hope for that reason, because hope is passive. Oh, I hope things work out. No, you can't just sit back and hope. You've got to make them happen. So that's what dynamic optimism or practical optimism is about. There's also a piece in that issue on extropia. I mentioned this in the chat there in another context, that the idea of utopia, which is often plugged into us, right? A lot of journalists will say, oh, these are utopians and they believe in utopia. No, because utopia is a static ideal. Go back to Plato, or Sir Thomas More, whose name I share, one of a few people. Their idea of utopia was a state of perfection, and that implies no further improvement. It implies that someone has an idea of how things should be, and we're going to reach that state, and then we're going to stop. That is not at all, to me, compatible with transhumanism or extropianism, which is about continual progress. There's no obvious limit to how far we can progress and develop. So the idea of utopia, I think, is actually quite poisonous, and instead the idea of extropia, or I think Kevin Kelly has the term protopia, is more of a direction. It's a movement that we can continue. Then in number 9, September, summer 1992, we had the Extraordinary Principles version 2, and that's the launch of Extropia Institute. So we went from the magazine to the Institute in a few years, and that started organizing conferences that I'll get to. Then in number 10, oh, by the way, thank you, Giulio, for scanning the magazines and putting them online. It's something I didn't get around to doing, so I appreciate that. You can get the PDFs online minus the covers, which we'll have to add at some point. So good job on that. So number 10, 1993, we had Hans Moravec's piece with the interesting title, Pigs in Cyberspace, which essentially was the idea that machine intelligence will go out into the universe and basically eat up matter and turn it into a thinking substrate. So, if you don't want to read his whole book, his Pigs in Cyberspace is kind of a short summary, well, kind of a summary of some of those ideas, and it's pretty wild stuff. There's also Josh Storrs Hall, whose book I strongly recommend, had a piece on nanocomputers, 21st century hypercomputing. And then in the next issue, we had a discussion of uploading consciousness. Into the cosmological side, we had traversable wormholes, how we might actually be able to expand beyond this universe, because we don't have very modest ambitions here. There's also an article by Julian Simon that I'm very happy to have from him, because I was a huge fan of his work, and I wrote to him and he agreed to write something for the magazine, so that was really good. This 12th issue, again, kind of another early start to an idea that's sort of taken off, in 1994, a practical look at ocean colonization. So the stuff that Patrick Friedman's been doing and the ocean colonization people, this is, as far as I know, pretty much the first place that appeared and was really discussed. And there's a lot of follow-up discussion of that idea on the Extropians email list, which I'll also get to in a second. Then let's see, what do we have? Oh, the Open Society and its Media. I think that was by Mark Miller. Really foresaw a lot of the development we've seen on the internet. Remember, this is right around the invention of the World Wide Web, when nothing had really happened yet. So it was really quite far-seeing, and talking about hyperlinks and how media will work in that kind of network situation. So it was pretty far-sighted. Number 13 in 1994, we had Boundless Constellations, the Emergence of Celestial Civilizations. Actually written by Nick Szabo, interestingly, who's much more known for his cryptography work, but a look at basically how we can expand into space and what that means. Also, Robin again appeared to talk about uploads versus AI. And there was also a piece on utility fog, an application essentially of nanotechnology. And number 14, 1995, the Roy Walford interview, which was a two-parter piece. Roy was an important figure in life extension and not discussed enough these days, not given sufficient credit, but you read his book Maximum Lifespan from way back then, I guess it was like 82 or something like that. Yeah, he was talking about ideas that people think are original in the last few years, which are not. These ideas have been around for quite a while. And number 15, someone recently picked this up, Max Tabrock, I think, on his blog, actually went through these and graded these. There's future forecasts, where a bunch of us sat down and tried to figure out when things might happen, like artificial general intelligence and nanotechnology and these kind of things. That included Eric Drexler, Gregory Benford, FN 2030, Nick Szabo, and other people. It's kind of interesting to go over that. I argued a bit with Max Tabarrok on some of his grading there, but it's forecasting the future is obviously very difficult. It's much easier to forecast the past, as has been observed. Getting the dates right is particularly difficult. So I think actually we didn't do that badly. If you, my problem was I gave specific years, and I should have given a range, because he says, well, it didn't happen then, it was 2 years earlier or later, so you got it wrong. Well, that's a little bit a bit mean, I think. Let's see. We also had Nick Szabo's. Oh, that was Nick Szabo. Okay. We had thoughts on the economics of digital money, Hayek's denationalization of money, and the theory of free banking. So we had 3 pieces there on digital currency. Again, this was stuff that was considered really strange and fringy back then. And now, of course, it's not. Now we have Bitcoin, and the people who developed those original systems were pretty much all extropians. Nick Szabo, Wei Dai, all on the extropians list. Pretty much everybody who was involved in that, and all the usual suspects for being Satoshi are basically all extropians, and discussed this on the email list and also on the crypto anarchy list, which was also a big crossover with them. So there's been a lot of discussion of digital currencies, but much less of denationalization of money, which is unfortunate. And that essentially is the idea that you don't need a monopoly on currency. You can actually have competing currencies, which actually might be good for controlling inflation. It'd be nice if Argentina would try something like this. Instead of willing to try radical stuff and are talking about pegging to the dollar, maybe just jump straight to competing currencies. That might be a little bit too much for them with all the other stuff they have to do. And then the 16th issue, 1996, I covered the neuroscience pioneers at USC, covering a lot of different types of neuroscience, AI work, studying the brain, scanning the brain, all things that were very advanced at the time and now seem fairly commonplace. Sasha Chislenko, also sadly departed, wrote a piece on intelligent information filters and enhanced reality. Again, a very early discussion of the idea of enhanced reality, augmented reality, as it's usually referred to today. I think Dwayne Hewitt wrote a piece on ideas, futures on the web, so extending Robin's idea to online and what you can do with that. And then also smart contracts, building blocks for digital free markets by Nick Szabo. So the idea of smart contracts, which are today is probably associated with Ethereum, but it's older than that. That got its start way back there in the mid-90s. So those are just, that's obviously just a small selection of what was in the magazine. But as I said, we started with 50 copies. We ended up with a few thousand before we had to stop doing it because it was too expensive. But the people who read that were of a pretty unusual mindset, unusual quality of people. The email list, which started in 1991, I think. Harry Hawke and Perry Metzger started that for us. That was, I hesitate to say the first internet discussion list, but certainly one of the very first, and the first to really discuss these kinds of ideas. And it's still around today, and a slightly different name, but it still exists today. So I think it probably is the longest lived email discussion forum in the world. At least it's got to be up there. Then came the Extro conferences, starting in 1994. The first one, we had Hans Moravec was a keynote speaker there. Ralph Merkel talked about the connection between cryonics and cryptography, which turned out to be very foresightful, because today there is a very strong connection between those ideas. So a lot of people into cryonics are also into cryptography and vice versa. And Ralph was making the point that you can actually apply cryptographic techniques in cryonics, in the sense that when you want to reconstruct a damaged brain in the future, you take what is left and you can infer the structure of what is left using cryptographic techniques, essentially. So you don't have to necessarily preserve brain structure perfectly, as long as you've left sufficient structure that you can infer the original state using these kind of techniques, or deep learning methods, as we would say today as well, then you can probably restore the brain. So that was 1994, that was 30 years ago. Extro 2 in 1995, we had Marvin Minsky as our keynote speaker, which was fantastic, the father of artificial intelligence. It's not really his fault that he held up AI for a couple of decades. That was people taking his perceptrons paper and not getting the point that that was just a two-layer system, and basically you can't do anything interesting with that, and people left that whole field of neural networks for a long time, unfortunately. But that's not really what he proved. He just he didn't show that if you have he didn't rule out having intermediate networks, intermediate layers in the network as being useful. So he kind of gets blamed for an AI winter there, which is not really fair. That was other people's assumptions. But he really not only set out the idea of AI, he talked in his book, The Emotional Machine, about the role of emotions in artificial intelligence, which is actually not discussed very much even today, interestingly. We had FM 2030, Michael Rothschild with his bionomic stuff, Bart Kosko, and Natasha was also in that one. So obviously just a few of the speakers, we had a lot of people there. Extro 3 in 1997, we had Gregory Stock, I mentioned his book, MetaMan. Greg is still around. I saw him recently. Natasha and I met him recently in Panama and caught up to date with him. That was very good to see him. We had, let's see. Oh yeah, Eric Drexler, Kevin Kelly. Yeah, and then in, let's see, Extro 4 was our Biotech Futures Conference. This was 1999, so quarter of a century ago now, which is kind of hard to believe in a way. But there we had Roy Walford again. We had Cynthia Kenyon. Calvin Harley, Michael West, Judith Campisi, Michael Rose, Liz Blackburn, Gregory Stock, Nick Bostrom, Chris Peterson, Michael Shapiro, a whole range of people discussing, especially at that time, the threat of regulation of biotechnology. We had the President's Council on Bioethics, led by, what's his name? Blanking on his name right now. Oh, Leon Cast. Along with Francis Fukuyama, was kind of on his team as well, very much against any kind of use of biotechnology to do anything other than cure diseases. And of course, that distinction between enhancement and cure is not necessarily that clear. But they took very seriously the whole set of transhumanist ideas that we were discussing, and just basically took the opposite position that we should be against all these things. It's quite an interesting book, and Cass is actually quite a good writer and philosophical, but he's just totally wrong on everything. But it's kind of a good foil to look at that and read that. Then finally, Extra 5, the last one we did in 2001. Ray Kurzweil was our kind of a top speaker, and he was presenting the ideas that would come out a couple of years later in The Singularity is Near. So he was just working on that at the time. And when he gave his talk in the question period, I raised the same objection I still have today, which is that Ray takes these purely kind of mathematical curves and trends and projects them indefinitely, when actually there were issues like regulation, which we discussed in terms of nuclear power and other technologies. Regulation, cultural resistance, political resistance, takes time for organizations to adapt to new technologies. We mentioned AI. That is maybe just beginning to help with productivity, but it's probably going to be years before people actually work that into their ways of doing things to really increase productivity. So technologies alone won't change things unless you can integrate them properly into the way people work. So he talked about that. We had Eliezer back then in 2001, when he was still kind of optimistic, when he didn't want to murder everybody who was creating AI. So he's really kind of gone on to the opposite side now. We had Anders Sandberg, also a very important figure in transhumanism and early extropianism, one of the first really good early websites as well. We had Hal Varian, economist, who went on to be Google's chief economist. There was Natasha Vita-Moore. There was Greg Birch on the Progress Action Coalition. We had Ronald Bailey, who still writes on technology policy for Reason magazine, is very good. Science fiction writer Greg Bear, and gerontologist Michael Rose. So a pretty great collection of people. And I think what I was excited about back then is, we didn't have any money. We started Extropy Institute the wrong way, basically. You're supposed to start it with wealthy founders. People can, like the Electronic Freedom Frontier that has 5 multi-millionaire founders. We started as 2 poor graduate students and struggled from there. But actually, given that we had no resources, I think we did quite well. The fact we could get this quality of people to come at their own expense, because we couldn't pay their way, to speak at our conferences, I think was quite remarkable, actually. So I mentioned the email list, which is, again, still around. It was the first on lots of topics discussing Jupiter brains, artificial intelligence, space colonization, cryptography, digital currency, many, many other topics you could find there first. I want to talk a little bit about the Progress Action Coalition, which I mentioned earlier. That came out of, or really, that really took the form initially of the first really good online technology conference called the Vital Progress Summit. And that was, a lot of that was organized by Natasha Vita-Moore, and myself. And we managed to get, again, these very high quality people together to discuss the President's Bioethics Council and the opposition to technology more generally, and what we could do about it. And the idea of forming some kind of coalition, progress coalition. That in the end led to me writing the proactionary principle, which again is the kind of alternative replacement for the precautionary principle. Whereas the precautionary principle says don't do anything first, or don't try anything new that might possibly have some side effects. It gives an absolute veto against progress, basically, for any kind of side effects. Instead, the proactionary principle said we have to look at the full range of consequences, positive and negative. We have to look at third order effects. It's really a meta principle that goes into other more specific principles about how to make sensible decision making concerning risk and technology. Kevin Kelly developed his own version of that. He talked about the pro-actions, which you can take. Also, Adam Tierra has written a lot of really good stuff, which he does under the label of permissionless innovation, but it's very much the same as the proactionary principle. He writes very good analyses of technology policy, particularly the current threats to AI from AI regulation. Okay, so I have to wrap up pretty soon. So my current concerns, so all that stuff was very positive, right? We were pushing the positive vision because nobody else was. We didn't have to worry too much about the downsides at that time because we just had to get the ideas across. I think things have swung far too much in the other direction, culturally, but also in our own community. There's a huge amount of doomerism around. It seems like we're always going to be doomed by something, whether it's the ozone hole or global warming or AI or nanotechnology or something. It's always something, and somehow it never happens. We're still here. Of course, it doesn't mean we can't. I personally worry about nuclear war. I think that was terrifying back in the 70s when I was growing up. I think it's actually become more dangerous recently. So that's actually, seems old-fashioned, but it's still a major concern. I also worry about pandemics, not just natural ones, but actually deliberately created ones, biological warfare. That's been talked about for a while. We only really have recently started developing the tools to make that realistic. So that's kind of scary, and we have to develop good defensive measures. Our reaction to the COVID pandemic was not encouraging. In fact, it was extremely discouraging and idiotic. So that does disturb me that we won't have very good protection from that and won't react well. Another big concern of mine is technological stagnation. Due to several factors, globally increasing regulations. And we're seeing this with AI. Europe has already pretty much killed itself, killed its AI industry. It's just not happening there. Almost all the AI stuff is happening in the USA, which so far hasn't managed to regulate it to death. There are plenty of bills in front of Congress that are trying to do exactly that. Some of them actually pushed by people who seem to have a transhumanist background but have become doomers. So that's distressing. That is a critical technology for our future that could accelerate all kinds of things, could accelerate nanotech designs, life extension advances. So to me, and as I've argued on my blog essays, existential risk has to be balanced by the idea of existential opportunity. If we don't develop these technologies, we're all dead. I'm going to be dead. You're going to be dead. There will be no life extension. We're going to die out. So existential risk is that one by one, the entire planet's going to die if we don't develop these technologies. So let's allow for that. Okay, you've got a very theoretical risk of crazy AIs taking over for whatever reason. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, as Ben said. But we have to balance that against the actual risk of actual death for all of us, one by one. Plus, of course, the continuing poverty and stagnation in a lot of places that we could probably help with more intelligence. Also, the other thing that frightens me is possibility of energy scarcity. Civilization depends on energy. And I find the whole net zero thing very distressing, very foolish. It would help if we had a lot more nuclear power. You could get to much closer to net zero if we had a lot of nuclear power, but most of the West has not taken that path. Hopefully, as James suggested, things are reversing a little bit. Nuclear doesn't have to be expensive. South Korea just a few years ago was building it for about a quarter of the price we can build it in the USA. In fact, you could argue you could maybe cut the cost by 90% by having more reasonable regulations. Every time it gets safer, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission just keeps upping the ante and making it more and more ridiculously oversafe, not really understanding trade-offs. Nuclear actually is relatively safe. I don't need to go into that. You're probably all aware of how 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl were rather overstated. People think they were much bigger disasters than they actually were. And some of those, like in Chernobyl, were using the most stupid combination of a graphite moderated water cooled reactor with no containment building. Only a freaking idiot or a Soviet would build something like that. So that all has to be considered as well. So just to finish off, because I'm out of time here, just a quick comment on EACC, as it's getting called. I don't really like that term, and long-termism. These have become much discussed recently, and I'm just going to put my blog URL in there if anybody wants to check out my blog. It's been going for about 1.25 years. There's a lot of stuff on there from a transhumanist point of view. As I mentioned earlier on, I'm not a consequentialist or utilitarian. I'm actually more of a virtue guy. I think that's more psychologically realistic. It can answer the question of why be moral more effectively. Consequentialism to me basically is telling you to maximize some quantity. Why should you? It's really part of ethics, I think, to look at consequences, but it can't be the whole thing. I think it's more about character. I'm more of an Aristotelian, sort of Aristotelian Nietzschean in my ethics, if you like. So I think it kind of goes wrong on a theoretical basis. I think it goes even more wrong when it comes to long-termism. Now we're being asked to sacrifice the present for a theoretical future, for people who don't exist yet. And to me, that's bizarre. And because there are far more possible future people than there are present people, basically what we want doesn't matter at all. We have to completely devote everything to the future or someone's imagination of the future. I don't think that's a very helpful policy and can be very destructive to the present. So overall, I think I like to get more optimistic. I think the last few years have shown some optimism. We're seeing some very impressive stuff with AI. It's not AGI. I don't think LLMs are going to be AGI, but as Ben said, there are other approaches, and there is now a possibility that we may achieve real artificial general intelligence fairly soon. But even without that, AI is doing some pretty remarkable things. We're just beginning to apply that to biology and to solving problems. I haven't really seen anything that interesting on applying it to life extension yet. You can screen a lot more proteins and design new drugs more quickly, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee progress. So one of my themes recently has been, don't be too over-optimistic. If you think back to the 90s, we're talking about the late 90s being a period of real optimism. Well, we decoded the human genome and people said, great, now we're going to create all these new fantastic drugs. And what happened? The rate of drug innovation went down because of regulation and increasing expense of developing new drugs. So having that technology does not automatically mean a big increase in progress. In fact, we saw the opposite. So that's why I'm a little bit cautious about saying, well, we have AI now and we have this and that. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll have this kind of progress unless we fight for it and stop people from regulating it to death. But I think there are promising signs and we need to push on those. I think we need to have these rational discussions, philosophical discussions, but also stories and myths. And yes, positive movies, positive TV shows that helps the culture. Just a couple of nights ago, Natasha and I watched The Martian again, and that really is an inspiring movie. It shows people using technology combined with their courage and determination to solve problems. That's a great message. And it's hard to find another science fiction movie of the last 20 years that's remotely positive, apart from maybe Her, which actually showed a fairly decent future in which AI didn't destroy us. It just kind of left it after a while, but it was actually fairly positive. So I hope you'll check out my blog at maxmore.substack.com and also the related one at Biostasis blog, my work blog, which focuses more on life extension and cryonics in particular. I think there's a lot more to do in this movement. We need to communicate together, develop, I think, more practical approaches like position papers would be a good thing. We talk about politics. We don't have to get into political parties, but we can address particular issues like AI regulation. I think publish policy papers, which actually Adam Tierra is doing with this permissionless innovation. So to get to grips with actual issues today, not political issues, but specific topics that can actually get grip on various different political perspectives, not all of them perhaps. So we have to get really practical. People are doing that, of course, by creating companies and building businesses and creating these technologies, but we also have to change the culture. So I think there's still a very strong role for transhumanism to change the culture, and that's what we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. As Robin said, that was a great history lesson. In fact, when I want an injection of that beautiful spiritual optimism of the 90s, I often go back and read something on the old Extropy magazine. It doesn't matter if the technology is kind of a little bit outdated in some cases. The spirit is there. Yeah, as you said, we have full scans of all the 17 issues of the X3D magazine online on GitHub, and we're always looking for better quality issues. So if you have some, just send them to me. Now, I said that I liked your history lesson, but of course, I do appreciate history to know what happened in the past. But I'm also interested in what is happening now and what we should make happen. And as you said, culture is important, and transhumanist culture has a lot to give to the world, especially at this moment. Do you have any quick ideas? And I say quick because I'm supposed to cut this short because of recording time limits. Do you have any quick ideas on, how we could start reproducing today that beautiful phenomenon, explosion of optimistic futurism that we had with the X3D magazine and the mailing lists 35 years ago?
Well, as I said, the importance of stories, I think we need a lot more stories. And our community obviously has had storytellers, especially among science fiction writers, but not so many directors and producers of that kind. So more of those would be good. So if you could find those people, and we know some of those people, try to get them to actually produce optimistic science fiction, which is difficult because you need to have a conflict, right? You have to have a conflict. So within that, you want to have a positive view of the future, but you have to have problems as well, probably enemies to make it gripping. So that's obviously one important thing. Sometimes I think that I need to go back and study Gramsci, who I don't like his Marxism. He was very much focused on how do we control, how do we shape the culture, how do we influence the culture, and actually was very successful because certain viewpoints now dominate the universities and academia, and even push businesses to have DEI initiatives and so on. So that movement was actually very successful. It'd be worth studying it, I think, to see how they had that much influence. How did that work out, and how can we maybe not necessarily copy it exactly, because some of the way they did it was not not cool, to put it that way, but it was certainly very effective. So how can we influence the culture? How can we be folded into existing power structures rather than, and we're not going to have a transhumanist party. I mean, I think that's just sorry, but I think it's a terrible idea to have a transhumanist party, unless it's meant as a purely educational thing, but there are other ways of doing that. There are a lot of different possible politics you can associate with transhumanism. I think having a party is not a good idea. It's not going to achieve any success because in the US system, third parties have a very hard time taking off. That was also true in England until the last few days, apparently, where it looks like one of the ancient parties may be crumbling and a new one may be arising. And we're seeing some interesting movements in Europe. But in many European countries, you have a proportional representation that gives third parties a chance of actually getting some seats. So in the English system, even though the Reform Party got, I think it was at 16% of the vote, they got 4 seats or something ridiculous. And it's pretty much the same in the US. It's very hard to even get on the ballot in all 50 states. Getting representatives is not practical. So I think a much better approach is policy organizations, like for instance, the Cato Institute does a lot of good work on regulation. These new pro-progress groups, humanprogress.org, these kind of people producing really compelling presentations of progress. That's why our World in Data is very effective, and humanprogress.org is very effective. And I'm trying to do that on my blog as well, to show how things are getting better and how they can improve further and paint a more inspiring vision of the future. Without that vision, we're just going to be focused on the fears that are always present in human experience. So we have to have these positive visions. So stories, maybe some kind of Gramsci-esque political approach, or not really political, but cultural approach, and presenting positive visions in as many ways as we can. I think those are some of the ways we can move forward, at least.
Thanks. Well, I have to say that I didn't expect to hear from you a recommendation to read Antonio Gramsci, but it's not a bad recommendation. And perhaps one of next time we should also have some discussion on Marxist philosophy, which perhaps is not that as bad as many people in the US think it is. But let me not go into that. Since I'm going to cut the recording, not the meeting, I'm going to cut the recording in 1 minute. I want to thank all speakers and all the organizers and all participants for one more very interesting Terasem Colloquium. And supposed to stop the recording, and here it is. Thank you again very much.